What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another amazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was kidnapped from Iwa and revealed as Deidara's brother with a secret Kekkei genkai? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. Deidara molded his clay into a small beige fox, allowing it to come to life and seat itself on his little brother's tiny chest. The baby made a happy gurgle as he reached out to touch the clay animal while their parents watched on fondly. This was the perfect scene of a happy family, the blonde child playing with his baby brother. No one could have expected for this day, with its wonderfully clear blue skies and shining sun, to go wrong. Just as the blonde man was standing to go toward his two sons, the most unexpected thing happened. A strange tri-pronged kunai flew into the room, followed by a bright yellow flash. Before anyone could react, the blonde father was already lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood. Deidara stared wide-eyed as the murderer began to approach his mother. He flinched as he glanced worriedly at his brother, only to be startled from his stupor by his mother's voice sounding clearly in his head. "Hide, Dei-chan, run and hide," Deidara whispered. "Stay safe, Ototo." He followed his mother's instructions and hid inside the closet and concealed his presence, preparing to leave through the escape route hidden there should the worst-case scenario occur. "I will keep Naru-chan safe. Just keep quiet for your Ka-chan, alright?" Deidara heard his mother say gently as he held in a sob. That evil man had killed his father and was attacking his mother, but Deidara could not do anything about it. He felt weak. He felt powerless. He vowed to grow stronger, if only for his dear Ototo. Just as the thought crossed his mind, Konaha's Kiroi Senko managed to get under his mother's guard and dodge a clay bomb as he stabbed a tri-pronged kunai into her chest, stabbing right through the main aorta. Deidara and Naruto watched in horror as their mother fell to the ground, a pressurized spray of blood leaving her chest as her heart gave out eventually and the light left her eyes. The last thing both children heard from their mother was, "Please take care of Naru-chan, Dei-chan. I love you both. Stay safe, okay?" Deidara turned on his heel and sprinted away, knowing that he stood no chance against the cruel blonde that had picked up his tiny baby brother carefully. Deidara knew that Naruto would not be killed if the man's gentle hold on the infant was any indication. Deidara swore to get stronger until he was strong enough to take his brother back from the cradle robber. He swore it on his life. Minato noticed a name embroidered into the blanket wrapped around the newly orphaned child. Naruto. Minato read out slowly, wondering about what he should do with the boy when he returned to Konaha. Minato had received information from a reliable source that Iwa's two best shinobi had had a child. He knew that they would have been most vulnerable then and had chosen to strike to cripple the other shinobi nation and take the child back with him to be a backup plan in case something happens during Kushina's birthing, which was to be in 7 months. Either that or to use the child as a bargaining chip against the Tsuchikage. "I guess that the two of us will just have to wait for Kushina-chan's verdict, huh?" Minato told the amazingly still infant, who had stopped crying, to stare up at the man curiously when its name was called. Minato prepared to flash to Konaha using the Hireishin, only for a strange and slightly pungent smell to invade his nostrils, freaking him out as he quickly spun around, looking for its source. He finally looked down to see the child in his arms giggling as though reveling in the confusion of the man holding him. Minato sighed as he finally realized that the baby only needed a change of diaper. Minato took some baby supplies from Naruto's dead parents' room and proceeded to remove the diaper and clean Naruto up, who Minato had just realized was a boy as he previously did not know the infant's gender. What he did not expect was for him to be sprayed with urine as the infant released his bladder while Minato was about to place the diaper on him, to which Naruto gurgled in a way that sounded suspiciously like a muffled laugh while Minato sighed in annoyance. The man then proceeded to the bathroom to douse himself with water and wash the urine off, drying himself with a minor wind jutsu. Minato returned to the room to finish wrapping the diaper, rather sloppily, for he had no experience with such a thing, and took the baby with him as he flashed back to Konaha using Hireishin. He appeared in front of the house he had been sharing with Kushina ever since they have gotten married the year before. He stood there awkwardly, briefly wondering if this was a bad idea as he began to back out to make a quick escape while he still could. However, his hopes of escaping peacefully were crushed when his wife stepped out of their house with a sickly sweet smile on her pretty face. "Honey, Who is that child? It couldn't possibly be an illegitimate child of yours, could it? Kushina questioned darkly, her smile never leaving her features. No, no, of course not. I would never cheat on you, Kushina-chan. Minato said hurriedly as he shook his head quickly and drew the infant closer to his chest subconsciously, causing the baby to wrinkle his nose slightly, the action going unnoticed by the two adults. The tension in the air caused by Kushina's dark aura subsided, allowing the blonde man to explain, "This is Naruto. I couldn't bear to leave him alone after I killed his parents, you see." Kushina's expression softened as she took the child from her husband and cooed at the little one while her free hand moved subconsciously to her own abdomen before it hardened again. Why would anyone in their right mind kill the parents of a newborn child? Kushina asked her husband, righteous anger shining in her violet eyes. Well, that's, the thing is, Minato stumbled as he raked frantically through his mind in search of a way to escape his situation with his life intact. His parents were top-tier shinobi of Iwa. I did it to cripple Iwa's shinobi forces. Minato told his wife a part of the truth, hoping for her to not question him further. Thankfully, for his family jewels, at least, it worked. Kushina sighed as she clutched the baby closer to her chest, glaring at the Hokage as she asked threateningly, "You will let me adopt Naruto as our son if only to set your mistakes straight, right?" Minato gulped at the look on his wife's face, trying desperately to not pee his pants. He nodded quickly, for that was the only thing he could do under his wife's ferocious, unrelenting glare. Kushina's mood instantly made a 180 in response as she smiled cheerfully, reaching out to pat Minato's head as though he was a well-behaving puppy. "Good boy," Kushina said approvingly, whereas her husband could only sweat drop at how quickly she could switch between moods. "I swear she's bipolar," Minato thought miserably as he did his best to not show it on his face. Naruto giggled at that, startling both adults as Kushina began to fawn over the adorable child. Neither would ever know that the little Naruto had been laughing at Minato's train of thought. This was how their first child, though adopted, was brought into their house for the first time. Minato winced as he watched his wife squirm and gasp on the bed. Her water had broken about an hour ago. Naruto had learned how to stand and walk unaided a week or so ago, to the great joy of his adopted parents, and was now maintaining a tight grip on Minato's index finger as he watched the woman who had tried, with good enough intentions, at the very least, to act as a replacement for his birth mother scream in pain as the crown of the head of a red-haired infant began to show between her legs while a midwife encouraged her to push. With confusion clear on his features, Naruto simply looked upon the scene quietly. Although Naruto had only spent a week with his real mother before she had been killed by the man he was now leaning against, he still felt that she had been far more important than the redhead on the bed could ever mean to him. Naruto still felt uncomfortable when he was alone with the blonde man, even after the man had established that he was not going to hurt him. However, Naruto had warmed up, somewhat, to the crimson-haired beauty that had treated him kindly throughout his 7-month stay in Konaha. Naruto winced as a red-haired baby smaller than himself finally popped out, screaming its lungs out and making Naruto clutch his ears. That baby was loud. Naruto was sure that he did not cry like that when he had been born. Naturally, most of what he remembered of that day was red and a ridiculously bright light. However, he was very sure that he did not wail like that. He would have remembered if he did, after all. Naruto noticed the infant start to quieten down and began to remove his hands from where they had automatically flown up to cup his ears, which made Minato chuckle at the adorable reaction. This caused Naruto to pout cutely. That was when another baby, this one with blonde hair that had red streaks on its tiny head, popped out with a grunt from the tired redhead who had taken to clenching her fingers on the damp sheets with her vice-like grip, wailing its heart out like the other one and causing Naruto's hands to fly to cover his sensitive ears once more. This time, Naruto remained tense as he waited for another one to pop out. It did not happen, but Minato gently removed his hands from his ears and guided Naruto to the bed where his wife lay exhausted, panting and half-conscious. The midwife wrapped up the two babes in warm fluffy blankets and placed the placenta in an empty basin before handing the two children to their mother. Just as she was going to receive the infants gratefully, the red-haired one vanished and the other one began to fall towards the ground while the midwife stiffened as her eyes rolled into their sockets and she collapsed to the ground. Before the red blonde could follow the woman's lead, Minato quickly flashed to the Hiraishin seal he had placed on Kushina and scooped the infant into his arms right before it could touch the floor. Both the blonde and the redhead sighed in relief, only to stiffen again as they heard an unfamiliar masculine voice. "Step away from the jinchuriki or this child dies." Minato's eyes widened as he turned toward the voice to see a man wearing a white mask with orange swirls who held his child to the point of a kunai. His eyes drifted to his wife, who shook her head weakly. "I will be fine. Go and take our child back from that man," Kushina rasped, a small and encouraging smile tugging at her lips. Naruto, however, had taken to staring at the masked intruder. This situation was ironically similar to the day he had been taken away from his home, the corpses of his parents left behind in the house without leaving any trace of their murderer. He stared at the intruder, who possessed the Sharingan. He frowned as he felt some of his chakra divert to his eyes as an opaque silver color glazed over his irises and pupils to form smooth glossy surfaces on his eyes as a golden swirling pattern ringed the iris. The eyes then proceeded to change, the iris tinting red and the gold melting away as black pupils and 3 tomo formed in each eye. He felt a brief stinging sensation and knew instinctively that his DNA was being changed slightly to support the Sharingan before stopping the chakra flow out of intuition when the sting reduced to a slight tingling feeling in the back of his eyes. Naruto glanced over to see that none of the other living occupants of the room had seen the change in his eyes and sighed in relief, knowing that it would have been troublesome if it had been spotted. He then glanced over to see that the Sharingan of the unknown Uchiha began to change. Naruto quickly followed the instinctive feeling once again and allowed his chakra to flood his eyes and copy the new stage of the man's Sharingan. The stinging feeling returned, slightly more painful than before. Naruto hissed quietly in discomfort, closing his eyes as the tomo morphed into a strange 3-pointed pinwheel. When the sharp pain receded, turning into a tingling feeling at the back of his head before it finally dulled, he noticed the influx of information about the Kekkei genkai he had copied. The Sharingan had the ability to copy ninjutsu, predict movements, copy taijutsu, use genjutsu of any kind without hand seals and gives the owner perfect photographic memory, the ability to see chakra and the ability to counteract genjutsu without a large chakra drain. The Mangekyo Sharingan had more abilities. The genjutsu cast using the Mangekyo Sharingan was more subtle, less noticeable and more difficult to escape, also including an unbreakable genjutsu called Tsukuyomi, a technique that the owner did not have access to but somehow manifested in Naruto's eyes. It also provided clearer sight, which included the ability to see chakra in different shades and the ability to use Amaterasu, inextinguishable black flames that burned until the target was completely incinerated into nothing but ashes. Another ability it provided was the Susanoo, a chakra manifestation that acted as an Uchiha's perfect defense and offense. A special ability limited to the particular Mangekyo Sharingan he had copied from was Kamui, a spacetime ninjutsu technique that allowed the masked man to phase through Minato's attacks and warp himself out of the way of attacks. However, the jutsu was supposed to be able to warp other things into a pocket dimension as well. He also knew that there were other abilities, though they were probably also unique abilities that he would not be able to replicate until he found another Mangekyo Sharingan to copy. Naruto also received information about how the Mangekyo slowly renders the user blind until they manage to replace their eyes with those of a close blood relative. He also found out that he could counter that easily by copying another Uchiha's Mangekyo Sharingan. Naruto opened his eyes after processing the information, only to see the masked man place a hand on Kushina's deflated stomach. A black sealing matrix appeared and a red chakra flowed from the seals. Naruto frowned in confusion as the red chakra formed into a 9-tailed fox. When it solidified, the fox caught his eye and seemed to blink in confusion before it surveyed the room blankly. That appeared to be the wrong thing to do as it locked eyes with the Uchiha and could not help but succumb to his control. The fox roared, only Naruto understanding what it had said. "Please help me. I don't want to be controlled by a damned mortal, especially not an Uchiha." Naruto looked around confused, noticing that none of the adults had shown any indication of having heard the fox's indignant shout of fury. The child could only blink as the Kyuubi crashed through the trees and began to lumber towards Konaha, briefly wondering if it would be better to just allow the fox to destroy the village. He was jolted from his thoughts when the masked man and the Yondaime Hokage jumped out of the safe house and began to battle. Kushina gingerly getting off the bed and embracing him carefully with the twins balanced carefully with one arm. "Everything will be all right. Believe in your two-san," Kushina mumbled soothingly, though it almost sounded like she was trying to reassure herself. Kushina absent-mindedly slipped the sleeve of her loose dress off her shoulder and fed the two infants that she began to cradle with both arms as she started to hum softly to her three children. She watched as Naruto seemed to allow his consciousness to drift, briefly pondering about whether the child could remember his real parents. She shook aside the thought, finding it silly. Sure, Naruto did not seem to trust Minato, but she doubted that he could remember something that happened to him when he was only a week old. Moreover, she had heard that babies only gained full eyesight when they were 2 months old. It was impossible. Naruto could not know, and he would probably never find out as long as she continued to play the role of the mother that her husband had taken from Naruto. Kushina was beginning to drift off into unconsciousness when she felt the familiar chakra of the Kyuubi outside the safe house. She tensed and carefully placed the two infants on the bed. She proceeded to run out of the safe house, reactivating the barrier and concealment seals as she left. The redhead did not notice the tiny blonde slip out of the shelter right behind her. When Kushina got to where she felt the brunt of the heavy and malicious chakra, she saw her husband quickly slap a contract seal on the masked man. She knew that it was to release the fox from the masked man's control. She sighed in relief when she saw said man make a quick escape, warping out of existence before Minato managed to unmask him without trying to go for her children. When the oversized fox began to bound off in the opposite direction of the village, she did not expect Minato to try to stop it in its escape. That was exactly what he did. "Why are you stopping the Kyuubi? Minato, are you trying to get yourself killed?" Kushina yelled, fearful for her husband's safety. "We cannot just let that fox go loose. It's too dangerous. Besides, Konaha needs a jinchuriki to maintain her standing as the pinnacle of all shinobi villages. It is a necessary military asset to our village," Minato explained hurriedly as he frantically tried to stall the fox's retreat, dodging a large claw as the Kyuubi tried to impale him in its attempt to escape. Kushina sighed, chakra chains shooting from her back to lash the Kyuubi down as she replied with hurt coloring her tone, "It's always the village with you, Minato-kun. Konaha this, Konaha that. Did really think that I will never become sick and tired of that? Besides, who are we going to seal the fox into? We cannot do that to one of our children. Sealing it into a grown adult whose chakra coils are already fully developed would be suicide, and I am still too weak to have the Kyuubi sealed into me again. How are we going to help Konaha obtain a jinchuriki if we don't even have someone to seal it in, huh? It's not even like we can just shove the damned fox in a jar like Suna did for Shukaku, you know. This is the Kyuubi, not the Ichibi." Minato sighed in relief as he did a flip and landed next to Kushina, thanking her quickly for her assistance. Naruto subconsciously activated his dojutsu once more to copy the Kekkei genkai of the Uzumaki, the chakra chains. This caused his whole body to begin to hurt slightly as his DNA edited itself such that he would attain the optimized set of Uzumaki bloodline traits, which included massive chakra reserves, high chakra density, natural sensor abilities, ungodly stamina, a natural affinity for fuinjutsu and accelerated healing. His chakra began to feel thicker as it coursed through his entire body, widening his chakra pathways and expanding his chakra core, causing him to fall onto his knees, trying to remain silent despite the pain as he bit on his lower lip to muffle a low whimper. When the pain finally subsided, he straightened up and stretched out a hand in front of him. Naruto sent chakra into his hand, following the feeling in his gut as golden chakra flowed out of his palms and solidified into ethereal golden chains. Naruto frowned. Why were his chains golden? From what he could tell, his Sharingan mimicked that of the masked man. Why did his chakra chains bear a different color from the red-haired woman's? Then it occurred to him that the color of the chains might be based on the hair color of the user. Moreover, since his whole body had adapted to allow him to bear all traits of an Uzumaki, he guessed that he now shared the Uzumaki ancestry with Kushina, effectively making him a blood relative of the wife of the killer of his real parents. Naruto felt uncomfortable about it, though he did not complain as the Uzumaki bloodlines were incredibly useful. Naruto retracted the chains and listened as Minato continued to speak when Kushina stopped her rant to stare at him expectantly. "That is why Naruto is here," Minato said evenly, shocking his wife at the coldness of his tone. "You can't just do that. You already took away his parents. We are already lying to him about his heritage. We cannot put him through the life of a jinchuriki. Since when have you been so cold-hearted, Minato?" Kushina screamed, upset that the man that she had thought she knew so well say something that she would never have expected of him. "What else? Naruto is our responsibility now. Would you rather put our own children through that kind of life instead? Besides, we will make it known that the jinchuriki is a hero. The only real hero from this incident. Moreover, it's not as though we will reveal the identity of our jinchuriki. I'm not that heartless to do that to a child that I already owe so much to." Minato rebuked, flashing out of the way when a large claw swiped at his head as the chains loosened slightly around the limb. Kushina sighed, knowing she had lost the fight. It was true that Konaha needed her jinchuriki to remain in power. Otherwise, should the other villages find out, they would team up to bring Konaha down. Likewise, they really did not want to make their own children have to live the life of jinchuriki. Both of them knew that the road was a dark one that they would not wish upon their own children. Additionally, the Kyuubi on the loose would be very dangerous and basically will be a recipe for disaster. The Kyuubi was strong enough to be classified as a walking natural disaster, which was dangerous as the fox could easily flatten mountains with a single swing of its 9 tails. They really had no other choice. Although Naruto was not yet able to speak, he was intelligent enough to be able to understand what the two adults were saying as well as the implications of the topic that they were discussing. Back in Iwa, he had heard his parents discuss the matter of the jinchuriki of Iwa. From what the boy could tell, the two were not well received whenever they entered the village. He guessed that jinchuriki were treated the same regardless of the country they hailed from and that his own treatment would probably be at least twice as bad as that of that jinchuriki of Iwa if he factored in the fact that the fox had caused mass destruction in the village and had 9 tails, which was significantly greater in number compared to Iwa's 4 and 5-tailed Biju. Naruto scowled at the woman, regretting allowing himself to trust her even in the slightest. He should have guessed that the wife of the murderer would have been similar to him in some way. The Kyuubi, on the other hand, was quite glad for the arrangement. The fox would have hated to have a weak container like one of the two born by his jinchuriki, who was an annoying and self-centered bitch, in his opinion, and had constantly stereotyped him as an evil and destructive beast without intelligence of any form. That only served to anger and infuriate the fox as he struggled under the tight binds that she'd had restricted him with. The tiny blonde child that watched the whole scene from the sidelines, however, showed promise. One look into these child's eyes and a single whiff of his unique scent was more than enough for that fox to identify the child as a Kagami. The Kagami had been an extensive clan in the time of Hagoromo, with several virtually immortal members that had been together with these Biju over the centuries. Those of the Kagami clan respected the Biju and had helped them out a lot, especially in their earlier years where they were still young and naive. The Kagami clan had also been rather close with Hagoromo, who the Biju had seen as their father before his passing, and had aided him significantly in taking out the Jubi and sealing it in himself. The Kagami clan had always been special. Even without ever having to consume the fruit of the Shinju, the members of the clan has always had the ability to use chakra. They were, in fact, much more skilled in its usage than Hagoromo and Hamura, who had turned to them for advice when the days were bleak. Centuries after the deaths of Asura and Indra, their descendants grew to feel threatened by the wealth of power that was the Kagami. The two clans of descendants of Hagoromo had teamed up to bring about the destruction of the long-standing clan, several other clans agreeing to join them in their quest for blood. They were able to kill off many of the Kagami clan, only 3 children of the main family and a single immortal surviving, the other elder immortals of the clan giving their lives to take out their enemies with the use of a sacrificial technique. After that, the children were raised by the last immortal left before they separated when the woman finally deemed them old enough to survive in this harsh world on their own. The Uchiha and Senju clans destroyed all traces of the very existence of the Kagami clan, unwilling to let anyone find out about the terrible defeat that had resulted in the untimely demise of about 90% of the ranks of each clan. What they never knew or found out about was the unique Kekkei genkai of the Kagami clan. Both the main and branch families possessed a strange ability. They were able to manipulate mirrors and anything that was related to light altogether. In other words, they were able to create mirrors that could reflect any attack, travel via reflective surfaces to any part of the world that they wanted to, bend light rays, using invisible mirrors, to create illusions that could fool even the Byakugan, bring shadows, the metaphorical shadows in people's heads and actual shadows alike, to life, and even make the illusions that they create or any type of reflection come into existence. However, no one had ever bothered to learn how to do all of them. The branch family were only able to manifest a maximum of 2 of the different abilities, while the main clan chose to focus on only 1 or 2 aspects of the ability, usually mirror travel and shadow manipulation. An ability that they had never explored due to not knowing of its existence was space-time manipulation. The last immortal Kagami was the only one to ever discover the truth that the realm that connected all mirrors and reflective surfaces could be manipulated such that time that passed within the real world would not affect the mirror realm and vice versa. The woman had died mysteriously after the creation of the Kurama clan, which was named after the Kyuubi himself. He had been honored when he found out that they had, in fact, named their clan after him. Kurama had visited when he first heard the rumors of a clan with the ability to make illusions come to life, only to be surprised when he discovered that the main branch Kagami had decided to focus exclusively on their ability to make illusions come to life, an ability that was rather similar in concept to Hagoromo's Banbutsu Sozo. The Kurama clan members had been extremely hospitable, treating him well, the survivor of the massacre informing him that he did not wish to let his clan find out about their overpowered dojutsu. Kurama respected his decision and left him to his own devices. The other 2 children, distant cousins that had originally been said to marry when they came of age, went to Earth Country where they settled down and had 2 children, 1 son and a daughter, together who were informed of their heritage. The daughter chose not to marry while the son also had 2 children that he raised with the knowledge of their heritage. This cycle continued, the remaining Kagami remaining largely unknown to the rest of the shinobi world as a man one of the generations copied the explosion release from the last person that belonged to her clan at her deathbed. The man proceeded to pass on the Kekkei genkai to his children to hide their true nature, who proceeded to do the same. After many generations with the explosion release being passed down from parent to child, the Kekkei genkai incorporated itself into their bloodline and got passed down naturally. At some point a Kagami had copied a telepathic ability from a now extinct clan that also became part of their bloodline after being passed down several generations. The explosion release quickly became the cover story of the Kagami family, only the Kagami themselves knowing of their actual Kekkei genkai. This was how it became a commonly known fact that the Kekkei genkai cannot be copied. Moreover, no new immortal had been born as the years dragged into centuries which dragged into millennia. The dojutsu of the main branch of the Kagami is the Kagami no Mi. It resembled a silvery mirror, as its name suggests, and had a ring of patterns surrounding the iris that had different colors and patterns depending on the owner of the eyes. Kurama had seen that the boy had instinctively used his eyes to copy the Sharingan of the Uchiha that had proceeded to control him. Enough for him to know instantly that the child held far more promise than any other child in the 5 great shinobi nations. Kurama did not mind being sealed into a child like that. The fact that he was a Kagami and would most likely respect him as a person was just a very good bonus. Kushina snapped out of her thoughts and began to speak, also catching the attention of Naruto and Kurama. Minato, we both know that a jinchuriki needs more love than anyone else. Would that mean that we might end up with not enough time for our own children? We wouldn't want to neglect any of them. Which is why we do not neglect any of them and take pains to treat them all equally. Natsumi and Narumi can grow up thinking that Naruto is really their blood brother. You said it before, he looks so similar to you that no one would notice. Iwa would never guess that Konaha's Kiroi Senko would have the son of their best shinobi anyway. Naruto will be well taken care of and everyone will be safe, Minato explained, knowing that his 7 months with Naruto had already caused him to begin to truly care about the little blonde that he had begun to find himself thinking of as his own son. It would not be that hard for Minato to act as though he was Naruto's father, considering that he had already begun thinking of himself as such anyway. Kushina could find no reason to further question her husband. No matter how much her heart screamed at her to not force her adorable adopted son into living the painful life of a jinchuriki, her brain told her that it was necessary. This time, she knew that her brain was right. Naruto watched as Kushina's shoulders slumped, deciding that it was time to show himself. He chose to call the two, Tu-san, and Ka-san, knowing that it would bring them to tears. Naruto knew that that sort of distraction would prevent the two from questioning him on how he could have gotten out of the safe house, as they would have been too guilty and happy that his first words were, Tu-san, and Ka-san. Naruto pulled a teary-eyed look and stumbled through the thick vegetation, whimpering once or twice to make his act more believable. Naruto almost laughed as the two adults tensed and started staring in his direction with apprehension. He purposely tripped over the root of a tree as he left the cover the bushes provided, falling flat on the ground when he finally cleared the line of plants. Minato and Kushina sighed audibly in relief. Naruto sobbed, tears trailing down his cheeks as he sat up, looking left and right while looking confused as he called out, "Tuhan? Kahan?" The eyes of both his adopted parents widened as Minato rushed to the little boy, scooping him up into his embrace and murmuring soothingly, "It's okay. Tu-san is right here." Minato felt another twinge of guilt for what he was about to do to the little blonde child. "We need to put something in your tummy, okay? It wouldn't hurt, I promise," Minato told Naruto as he drew the sealing matrix for the 8 trigram seal on the ground. Naruto blinked innocently, pretending to be confused about what the man was trying to imply. Minato changed his approach, "You will be getting an orange foxy friend." Naruto pretended to still be confused, making Minato sigh as he placed the boy on a sealing altar that he had summoned from somewhere, in the middle of a circle of seals. Minato continued to whisper that everything will be all right and that nothing bad would happen to him. Kushina, however, was surprised when she finally realized that the Kyuubi had stopped struggling. Said fox had taken to staring at the blonde Hokage in confusion. Despite the similarity in hair color which the man shared with the young Kagami, the blonde was definitely not related to Naruto. "What is that man to you, young Kagami?" the fox questioned softly to his would-be jinchuriki. Naruto shifted his gaze to the fox as he heard the question, which to the two adults sounded like a low growl. He connected his mind to the fox's as he tried to relay his thoughts through language. Naruto fumbled for a word as his nose wrinkled in concentration. He killed Ka-san and Tu-san. Naruto continued to think very hard as he tried to translate his next thought into language. He also made Dei ni. Naruto searched for a word that would fit the meaning of what he was trying to say. Before continuing, he made Dei ni sad and angry. "He took me away from." Naruto tried his best to recall what his father had said whenever he returned home after a day of work, before seeming to ask sheepishly, "Home?" Kurama growled. So the blonde that had killed off 2 of the remaining Kagami in the world and orphaned their 2 young children. That was unforgivable in his book. Kushina seemed to catch on that something had upset the fox and tightened the restraints before the Kyuubi could charge Minato, who had started to perform hand seals at an impossible speed. When Minato finished the last one, he slammed both hands on the ground where he stood behind the blonde baby and facing the 9-tailed fox. Hake no Fuin Shiki, 8 trigram divination seal. Minato shouted as the seals on the ground glowed blue with his chakra and created a line of glowing seals towards the Kyuubi and running up the sealing altar to rest upon Naruto's covered stomach. The seals wrapped around the fox's limbs as Kurama's chakra was drawn into the tiny child, the fox now completely ceasing his attempts to escape. The fox seemed to growl softly to the 2 shinobi while the young boy on the sealing altar heard his words clearly. "It is all right now, Kit. I will be with you. I will protect you," Kurama vowed, feeling a strange power already within the blonde as his chakra was sucked into the swirl on the babe's abdomen. Kurama may just have found the latest immortal Kagami. And this child would no doubt shake the world foundations to its very core in the future. He was sure of it. Naruto winced where he lay on the sealing altar, feeling the ridiculously heavy chakra of the Kyuubi no Kitsune weigh on his tiny stomach. The fox considerately did not struggle, making the process much less uncomfortable, but it was still painful for a foreign chakra to enter his body with or without a seal as an intermediary. The blonde child valiantly fought against the urge to fall into unconsciousness but allowed his eyes seem to slide shut when he had really left them a crack open to be able to see his surroundings while hiding the fact that he was still awake. Kushina, on the other hand, was not so lucky. As the adrenaline wore off, she collapsed to the ground limply. Minato, on the other hand, just rushed to his wife's side, picking up the woman bridal style and scooping up the blonde baby. He took his wife and son to the safe house where his 2 biological children had slept through the whole fiasco. Minato made 2 shadow clones to carry Kushina and Naruto, picking up his children, one in each arm. He had known from the start, thanks to Tsunade's checkup, that he was to have 1 son and 1 daughter, but he had not known which was which. Minato picked up the 2 children and made a quick check. He had the right to, after all. He was their father. Finding out that the red-haired child with fairer skin like Kushina's was female while the red blonde-haired child that had his natural tan was the male child. Minato wondered briefly about the color of the eyes of his children, musing that it would definitely be adorable to see a mini Kushina running around the village pulling pranks on people. While Natsumi had a facial structure that vaguely resembled Kushina's rounded face, Naomi's facial structure was more defined, resembling her father more. Minato compared his twin children to their adopted older brother, finding himself smiling at the sight. Naruto fit right in with his 2 dear children. A redhead, a blonde with natural red highlights when put together was not strange at all. Naruto looked like one of his own children, just a little older. Minato sighed as he realized that the blonde child was going to be in a different graduating class from the 2 younger children if he decided to attend the Shinobi Academy, which was very likely seen as both he and his wife were very high-ranking shinobi. Minato flashed back to the village using his Hireishin and ordered his clone to drop Kushina off at the hospital before bringing his 3 children along to address the village. People of Konaha, I am saddened to announce that our shinobi forces have been reduced to 75% of its original population due to the unprecedented strike by the Kyuubi no Kitsune. I would like to inform all of you that this was neither an accident nor an occurrence caused by a malfunction of the seal that kept the fox sealed in its jinchuriki. It was pure foul play, a ploy carried out by a strange man with an orange swirled mask who possesses the Sharingan of the Uchiha clan. Though the unknown intruder bore their Kekkei genkai, I can safely say that this attack was not the doing of the Uchiha clan that resides within Konaha. It was either an Uchiha that had never been accounted for or one that was presumed to be dead, which I deduced because of the lack of similarity of the chakra signature of the man and any Uchiha in the village. May we all remain vigilant and remain prepared for another attack, however unlikely it is. Minato declared, the crowd receiving his speech with loud cheering and smattering applause. The Kyuubi no Kitsune has been safely defeated and sealed into a new jinchuriki. Though the identity of the jinchuriki is not to be revealed, I would like to inform all of you here that the jinchuriki is merely the only line of defense between our village and the mighty Biju. This is why I am here to tell all of you that the jinchuriki of the fox is the real hero of the day. Not me, who did the sealing. Not Kushina, who held the fox down as it was sealed. No, your hero is the one whose life has been sacrificed for our village. The sealing scroll that contains the kunai is harmless. However, the kunai in the scroll is the one that can truly harm. As long as no one does anything to remove said kunai from its scroll, it is harmless. A scroll cannot kill, it is the kunai that can cut. For protecting the village from the demon fox, let us all applaud the one who had made a huge sacrifice to save our village from its destruction. Minato finished soulfully. Although the shinobi below as well as the civilians that had been released from the safe houses were silent for a full minute as they seemed to contemplate and process their Hokage's words, all got over their shock and clapped and cheered once Kakashi had boldly disrupted the awkward silence with loud applause. Though many were scowling and scanning the distance for the possible jinchuriki at the start of the second part of Minato's speech, all had stopped doing so near the end of it, favoring listening to their beloved Hokage talk about the sacrifice made by the jinchuriki. Many then commended the strength of the previous jinchuriki for having held the Biju back from destroying the village, while even more admired the sacrifice made by the unknown jinchuriki to save the village. Naruto was surprised by how well the citizens of Konaha, shinobi and civilian alike, took to Minato's words. He had expected them to shun the existence of the jinchuriki as the general populace had seemed to regardless of what Minato told them. He could not help but respect the man for his ability to change the perceptions of others with his undeniable charisma. Though he could see how a man who knew when to push, when to give in and when and how to go about conveying certain things to do what is best for his village became Hokage, he still saw the man as the murderer of his parents. This could not be helped, seeing as Minato did assassinate his beloved parents and take him away from his precious older brother, but Naruto could at least let his guard down enough to allow himself to drift off into unconsciousness as he had stopped himself from doing before. Naruto felt himself in something wet but warm and opened his eyes to find himself in a blue river, with a bit of gold that trailed through it without mixing with the blue, of what he deduced was his chakra when he noticed a larger red river beside it that leaked some red chakra into the larger blue river where smaller blue channels converged constantly. Naruto followed the red river upstream, ignoring the forests that looked rather similar to the forests of Hai no Kuni as he trekked towards the source of the red chakra. He guessed that it was the chakra of the Kyuubi, considering that it had just been sealed within him only moments before. Naruto saw that the chakra flowed from the side of an enormous tree that had the strangest glowing leaves of all colors and shapes. A large hollow could be seen at the bottom of the tree, the insides seeming dark and foreboding. Naruto ignored that and approached the hollow, entering the space without a second thought. His suspicions were proven right when the enormous fox came into view behind a translucent bluish barrier looking miserable about being stuck in such an enclosed space. The Kyuubi perked up when he saw Naruto enter, stretching as he uncurled his body from how he had been curled up like a cat. The fox padded to the barrier and stared at his new jailer, nodding approvingly after scrutinizing him as though searching for something. The fox seated himself on the ground and motioned for Naruto to join him, stretching out a tail for the tiny blonde. Naruto complied and walked through the barrier without hesitation and sat on the tail offered to him by this nine-tailed fox. Naruto stroked the fur, surprised by how soft and fluffy it was. The fox only laughed at the child's antics and brought his tail upwards such that Naruto could look him in the eye. "Hello, young Kagami," the fox greeted, Naruto recognizing the form of address from how his mother had been addressed by other shinobi. "Hello, Kitsune," Naruto greeted simply, noticing that it was easier for him to talk in this place. "Welcome to your mindscape, though I do not know what it looks like," the fox said grandly before mumbling the second part of his sentence under his breath. Naruto ignored the welcome that he had been given by the fox, bouncing to his feet as he balanced carefully on the fluffy tail. "I'm Kagami Naruto. What's your name?" Naruto asked cheerfully. "Do you not believe the other humans when they say that my name is Kyuubi?" the fox asked, genuinely curious about Naruto's reply. "Of course not. The Ichibi has a name, Shukaku. The Ichibi part is just his title, one tail. You are the Kyuubi, the 9 tails. That is just your title. What is your name?" Naruto repeated with a pout. The fox chuckled before replying kindly, "I'm Kurama. Only you Kagami would bother to ask for my name. Any other human just labeled me as the 9 tails and left it at that." Naruto's eyes began to sparkle as he leaned forward to get closer to the fox, falling off before he was deftly caught by a second tail. "Tell me more. What do you know about my clan and Kekkei genkai?" Kurama shook his head, already fond of the adorable blonde, chiding lightly, "Careful there. You almost fell." Naruto frowned. "If I fell, you would catch me as you did before, no?" "Of course, but it is dangerous nonetheless," Kurama replied with a sigh. Naruto sat down on the tail with a huff, snuggling up to the fur as he got comfortable in preparation for what he knew would be a long story. Kurama told Naruto all about his clan, even explaining the abilities of his Kekkei genkai and how they worked. Kurama had hesitated before telling the blonde that he was immortal, having checked the boy for the particular trait that the immortal Kagami had shared while they still existed. It was what seemed to be another color swirling in the depths of the eyes that remained regardless of whether the dojutsu had been activated. That was what he had been scrutinizing the blonde for, along with the presence of the small birthmark that the immortals were born with at the nape of their necks. It looked like the Kagami clan symbol had been branded into his skin, though it was completely natural as seen in the obvious lack of scar tissue on the tender skin there. Kurama even bothered to explain what happened if Naruto's opponent were to land a killing blow. The truth was, each and every one of the immortal Kagami had been from the main branch. When they receive a killing blow or lose a body part, they could either choose for any dismantled body parts to quickly pass through a mirror where they would be reconnected. If the body had been thoroughly destroyed, only the consciousness would be transported and another body would be constructed, by the bloodline that had given them immortality. Alternatively, they would leave a reflection-turned-real replica of their dead body. This meant that they were able to perfectly fake their deaths to anyone who did not know of their immortal status. The transporting to another location after losing body parts option looked a lot like the Izanagi of the Uchiha's Sharingan. They were really unaffected by immense blood loss and could actually stop the blood flow if they wanted to. In other words, the blood flowing through their bodies is only for show, as the bodies of immortal Kagami clan members did not need their blood to survive. There was also the choice for him to remain conscious even if a major body part, for example his head, were to be detached. But Kurama did not want to tell Naruto about it, as actually found it quite disgusting. Naruto listened attentively as Kurama ended the story of his clan and began to tell him about Hagoromo, who Kurama had referred to as his father, and his children. Naruto found out about the rivalry between the Uchiha and Senju and about how Uchiha Madara had controlled Kurama to fight against Hashirama, which had led to Kurama being sealed for the first time. Kurama told Naruto about how Madara was actually still alive after his supposed death after his battle with Hashirama that had been named the Valley of the End in honor of their battle. Madara had been, for some reason, wielding a sword that was capable of storing a whole pint of blood. Kurama began to talk about how his previous two jinchuriki had either held him down with torii or chained him down with chakra, at some point shifting to his vendetta against Uchiha Madara and the masked Uchiha. Kurama told Naruto that the man had claimed to be Uchiha Madara when he clearly was not the powerful man and did not possess the same ocular abilities and chakra as Madara. Kurama began ranting about how Uchiha were arrogant, snobbish pricks with sticks stuck up their asses after he mentioned Madara. Naruto had listened quietly despite not being particularly interested in how the Uchiha thought that they were God Almighty with their oh-so-amazing Sharingan, knowing that Kurama just needed to vent his annoyance at practically everything as he had been pinned down without his freedom for far too long. He waited patiently for the fox to finish, calmly watching as Kurama finally stopped talking when he had run out of things to complain about. "At least I will never have to watch you die," Kurama said with a sigh, vowing to never tell Naruto about the sacrificial jutsu that he found largely pointless and not worth sacrificing his life for. Naruto shrugged, unable to help but flinch as his mother's death seemed to flash before his eyes, making Kurama's eyes soften as the fox asked, "How old are you, Kit?" "You're awfully tiny." Naruto counted off the months on his fingers, holding out 7 fingers in front of his face. 7, Kurama supplied. "I'm 7 months and a week old," Naruto told Kurama, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. Kurama was shocked. A baby, not even 1 year old, was able to speak so well. Of course, the boy stumbled a little when he spoke and paused very long to think about how he should say it to convey his thoughts. However, he still had quite a range of vocabulary to be able to understand so much of what Kurama had said. Moreover, Naruto was able to walk unaided. This was evident in how Naruto had managed to avoid Kushina's notice as he followed her to the clearing where Kurama had been. The boy had managed to coordinate his limbs well enough that his 2 adoptive parents did not notice him until he had chosen to reveal himself. They were shinobi, among the most powerful ones of their time, even though the child's status as an immortal might have increased his rate of mental and physical development. It still should not be possible for an infant to catch 2 trained shinobi off guard. Naruto tilted his head to the side before he hopped off the tail, winds catching him and helping him land gently. "Would you like to have this barrier removed, Kurama?" Naruto asked, a sly smile creeping over his slightly chubby features. "Why not?" Kurama asked rhetorically, feeling uncomfortable with how the boy looked at him so expectantly. Naruto smiled cheekily, "Well, that's because I'm going to do this." All at once, the barrier came down and the kanji for seal shimmered out of existence. A weight appeared on the fox's neck and multiple beams of colored light began to shine into the large hollow, leaving Kurama blinking for 10 seconds as he processed what had happened. The fox looked down to see what was on his neck, only to see something that annoyed him, only slightly, though. "Why did you make me wear a collar?" Kurama asked Naruto while frowning with displeasure. Kurama hated dogs. It had something to do with his foxy nature. "It is better than stopping you from your freedom, no? The seal cannot be removed by an amateur like me, anyway," Naruto replied while giggling uncontrollably. Kurama sighed as he stepped out of the hollow, nodding appreciatively at the beautiful forest that was Naruto's mindscape. "You have style, Kit," Kurama commented. Kurama felt his nose twitch and his ears go flat when he saw a large rabbit run across the field. His tails began to swing before Kurama bounded off, chasing after the poor rabbit. Naruto just shook his head at the millennium-old fox, following for a short distance until he reached the other end of the clearing to watch the fox. "I should go now. See you," Naruto called out as his manifestation within his mindscape vanished into a breeze. Naruto opened his eyes to find himself in his own cot at the left of the king-sized bed that Minato and Kushina shared. He sat up to see that the two cots on the other side of the bed were empty, groaning as he did so. Naruto climbed onto the top of the barrier on the side of his cot, which prevented him from falling to the ground in his sleep, and jumped. Naruto fell onto the bed with practiced ease and rolled toward the side, carefully climbing down the high bed at its foot. Naruto padded out of the empty room and into the corridor, climbing down the stairs slowly step by step as he took solace in the fact that everything in the house had already been made baby-proof and baby-safe when Kushina decided to adopt him. Naruto entered the living room where he saw the Hokage with his wife and their two children. Naruto walked over and tugged on the hem of Kushina's skirt, rubbing his eyes and yawning cutely. Kushina resisted her urge to squeal at how adorable her eldest son was and smiled down at the little boy, still but a baby, before picking him up and placing him in her lap beside his new younger brother. Naruto blinked at the little thing, with a slightly misshapen head and eyes closed into slits. Naruto reached out, looking at Kushina as though asking for permission. Kushina smiled at him, placing the tiny hand on the younger infant's leg. Naruto poked it, watching in amazement as the leg twitched and kicked out. Natsumi whined as he was awakened from his nap and began reaching blindly for the offending object, opening his blue eyes for the first time. Natsumi's eyes shifted back and forth, unfocused until Naruto leaned in closer until he was nose to nose with the younger infant, which earned him a happy gurgle, the baby's first sound besides crying. Kushina and Minato watched on in awe as their adopted son interacted with their youngest, slightly jealous that Naruto had been the first person that Natsumi had ever seen. Natsumi gazed into the eyes of his older brother, mesmerized by the swirling undercurrents that neither Minato nor Kushina had noticed. Natsumi reached out and grabbed Naruto's shirt, the boy not falling off the woman's lap only because of the arm that the woman used to support his back. Naruto stiffened and tried to pry off the tiny hands of his adoptive sibling, making Minato and Kushina chuckle at the unrelated siblings as they interacted. Kushina's eyes then widened as she noticed something that neither she nor Minato had before. "Nay, Minato-kun," Kushina said softly so as to not disturb the sleeping Naomi. Minato hummed, shifting his daughter to his other arm as he looked at his wife questioningly. "I thought that the Kyuubi can only ever be sealed in Uzumaki?" The fact that Naruto had survived might very well be just pure luck. "What would you have done if Naruto did not survive the sealing, huh?" Kushina asked him with a raised eyebrow. Minato's eyes widened. He had completely forgotten that the chakra of the Kyuubi no Kitsune was too heavy for anyone other than an Uzumaki to be able to contain. This meant that Naruto was either really lucky to survive or that Naruto actually had some form of Uzumaki heritage. Although it was neither, the two adults did not know that. Kushina gazed at the children in her lap, her two babies. She was glad that Naruto had survived. If he did not, well, they did not know what they would have done. It is most likely that Naruto is actually descended from one of the other Uzumaki survivors. Minato paused before continuing, "I am sorry for killing your clansmen." Naruto only listened quietly as the two adults came to the outrageous conclusion that he was an Uzumaki. His mother had explosion release while his father was blonde. "I don't know which one has been Uzumaki. It should have been the man, though," Minato told his wife. Kushina nodded, frowning. Her husband had killed her relative. She was glad that he had taken Naruto back with him to Konaha, though. Kushina helped to detach the small hands from Naruto's clothes and embraced him tightly. Naruto squeaked as he squirmed slightly before giving up when he decided that the woman was not going to let go of him anytime soon. Naruto let the woman hold him as he just sat there awkwardly. Minato just smiled at the sight. Naruto stumbled as he crawled out of his bed in the room that he had just been moved into a week after his third birthday, which was the day the two Konoha nin had decided to celebrate as his birthday despite it only being his anniversary of the day he left Iwa and joined Konoha, The two decided that the boy was old enough to move out of the nursery that he had shared with his two adoptive siblings. He padded out of the room and made his way out into the corridor. Just as he was going to make his way to the master bedroom to find Kushina to ask her for breakfast, Naruto was tackled by a red and yellow blur. Naruto fell onto his butt, disoriented as he blinked owlishly at the smaller child straddling his waist with eyes glittering in excitement. "Naru ni!" The said child giggled as the child rolled off the older boy, bouncing on the balls of his feet while he stared at Naruto expectantly. Naruto raised an eyebrow, doing his best to keep a frown off his face as the face of Namikaze Minato fleetingly passed through his thoughts due to how much his son had taken after him. The damned Hokage kept trying to convince Kushina to begin training him to become a weapon for the weak village, while neither said man nor his wife had ever considered that he might have preferred being returned to Iwa, though that was not much of a choice due to his recent status as Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The two adults practically stole him from his home village without remorse. They did seem to have felt bad for orphaning him, but they never regretted taking him away from Iwa. For that reason, Naruto decided to call them cradle robbers. They did not treat him badly and acted as though he was actually their son for the most part, but the man had already lost his trust on the day he killed the two Kagami that had made up 2/3 of his small world. Naruto did learn to ease up around the blonde. Well, mostly. Of course, Naruto would remain prepared to be attacked by that man in his sleep, but that was justifiable considering what the man had done to the young child when he was still an infant. Naruto sighed and stood up, dusting off imaginary dust as he began to make his way to the bedroom belonging to Kushina and Minato. He had hoped to make his way there without more trouble, but that was just his wishful thinking. He was tackled again. It was a red-haired child, though. Naruto sighed and carefully pushed the younger child off, groaning, "What is it, Natsumi, Naomi?" "Aniki, it's just that you," Naomi began, only for Natsumi to finish, "promised to play shinobi with us." Naruto sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "What did I say about talking like that?" "Not to do it," the twins chorused innocently. "So why are you doing it?" A threatening note crept into Naruto's voice, making both children gulp subconsciously. "Sorry, Naru ni," Natsumi yelped as Naomi squeaked at the same time, "Sorry, Aniki." Naruto only clicked his tongue, continuing towards the master bedroom as the twins followed behind him like little ducklings. After a period of silence and before the immortal boy opened the door, Naruto turned back to the two children. He smiled. There was no reason to blame children for their father's sin. After breakfast, Naruto said simply, but that alone made two overly hyper toddlers giggle and dance around happily. "Yay!" Naruto shook his head and knocked on the wooden door, opening it before he received a reply. "Ohio, to-san, ka-san," Naruto greeted, repressing his urge to say it with a monotone. "Naru-chan," Kushina replied with a warm smile, poking Minato in the side to wake him up. The blonde groaned, opening his eyes sleepily. "Good morning, Kushina." When Minato's eyes focused, he added, "Morning, Naruto." The twins poked their heads into the room, peeking at their family members. "To-san, ka-chan." The two called out in glee as Naomi jumped on Minato while Natsumi scrambled onto Kushina. Kushina giggled, poking Natsumi in the nose. "Good morning, my little ones." Minato chuckled at his wife's fond adoration for their children, ruffling Naomi's hair as he greeted, "Good morning, Natsumi." Naruto watched awkwardly, waiting for the family moment to end so he could ask for breakfast. Kushina felt a pang of guilt when she noticed her adopted son stand beside their bed, looking out of place. She smiled at the boy and motioned to the empty spot beside her. "Come over here, Sochi," Kushina invited, guilty that she had almost forgotten Naruto. Minato's eyes widened as he noticed what had happened, proceeding to smile encouragingly at the boy as a flash of guilt crossed his eyes. Naruto shook his head, refusing to intrude into their happy family. Both Minato and Kushina felt a bit hurt at that. Perhaps they did not do enough to make the boy feel welcome in their home? "I just came here to request for Ka-san to make food," Naruto rejected politely. "Besides, does To-san not have to get to his office by 8 o'clock? "It's okay. I still have an hour," Minato told Naruto, hoping that he would stop distracting himself. Kushina kicked her husband in the shin discreetly under the cover of the comforter, setting her son on the bed before approaching Naruto. She stopped in front of the child and kneeled in front of him, wrapping her arms around Naruto before he could protest. She held the boy tightly as she felt a tear escape her eye. "Everything's alright, Naruto. Won't you tell me what's bothering you? We're family, after all." Kushina's words were completely sincere, having thought of the child as her own son, especially since she had found out that Naruto was actually a distant cousin, which was not true as he only replicated all Uzumaki traits in himself through editing his DNA to make him completely independent from the person he had copied it from. Something he had gathered from talking to Kurama, which had also led to his confusion as to why the Mangekyo Sharingan been almost an exact copy of that of the unknown man with only a few extra features, from the beginning. Naruto had to stifle his laughter, only for Kushina to misunderstand his actions as she thought that he was sobbing on her shoulder. The poor child deserves to let down his guard and cry sometimes, Kushina thought to herself as she gently pets Naruto's head. There, Kushina said reassuringly, only causing Naruto to shake harder as he had to do more to stifle his laughter. Naomi and Natsumi kept their distance despite not knowing what was going on. From the look that their father shot them, it was personal and not something they should intrude on. Naruto took 3 minutes to fully suppress the guffaws that had threatened to bubble from his chest, breathing heavier at the end of it as he pulled away and made a big show of wiping off his tears of laughter to make it seem more like he had been crying. Naruto felt as though the two were much too easy to fool sometimes. Were shinobi not meant to look underneath the underneath? At least that was a supposedly important quote from one of the books about shinobi that his adopted parents had told him to read after he had learned how to read on his own. He had some help from Kurama with the pronunciations of some of the more difficult kanji, though he instantly absorbed the knowledge and never had to ask the same question more than once. Seeing as the two were believing his acting, they probably did not take those words to heart. Naruto smiled weakly, sniffling before asking when his stomach growled, "Will you please make breakfast, Ka-san? I'm hungry." The twins' stomachs made synchronized grumbles of agreement, causing the two adults to laugh as they began to busy themselves with preparing for the day ahead. A week later, Minato brought up the matter of whether Naruto was to start his training, which he would only have to do if he chose to attend the academy, of course. Naruto readily agreed, deciding that he would also train more with Kurama so that he would be able to graduate earlier and get closer to reuniting with his brother. This led to a whole pile of books that he was told to study before he could actually start on the actual training. Naruto chose not to complain and studied all the books carefully, researching more about everything that had been mentioned within the books while treating information from said books as a basic overview instead of the study material. Neither Minato nor Kushina had expected it of him. Naruto then made consolidated notes about every topic he had found, detailed enough that even Anbu could make use of his notes. He had obviously studied Fuinjutsu and worked on his calligraphy first before going through everything else. This caused Naruto to look through almost every book in the Uzumaki Namikaze library, which had a copy of almost every book in the elemental nations. Minato and Kushina are actually quite the knowledge hoarders. Naruto managed this with the help of shadow clones, a jutsu he had copied from a silver-haired jonin who had been sparring with a strange man with a bowl cut and huge eyebrows who was wearing a green latex jumpsuit. Naruto had also copied several other techniques from other shinobi around the village, having had his chakra unlocked from the very beginning. Naruto had found out about the perks of the shadow cloning technique by accident when he sent a clone off to help him copy techniques from other shinobi, which actually got him a Byakugan before it got dispelled and he received the information. Naruto had used shadow clones heavily in his studies, spamming a good 100 to study a certain topic before dispelling while leaving 10 to sort through the information before 8 dispelled and the last 2 wrote everything down neatly. The actual Naruto, in the meantime, stayed in his mindscape and learned how to use his Kekkei genkai under Kurama's guidance. Naruto mastered mirror travel within the first month and had tried visiting Suna where he met a red-haired jinchuriki whom he befriended and copied the Kekkei genkai of, immediately. Naruto promised to learn more about seals to once day fix his friend's faulty seal and get Shukaku to cooperate with him. This jinchuriki was Gaara, the son of the Yondaime Kazekage and the jinchuriki of Shukaku, the Ichibi no Tanuki. Naruto was about to head home after parting with Gaara but fell out of a reflective surface in the Mizukage's office, the glass of a random photo frame. He noticed that a boy who looked like he was 9 years old and wore the traditional robes of the Mizukage had the pattern of the masked man's Mangekyo Sharingan in his eyes, looking rather dazed. The boy who appeared to be the Mizukage did not notice the 3-year-old who was watching him. Naruto sank back into the glass surface of the framed picture, deciding to observe the Mizukage for a while. His decision was rewarded with an odd revelation. The Mizukage seemed to be controlled by someone, most likely the unknown Uchiha that had extracted the Kyuubi from Kushina and was fighting back with little success. Seeing as the boy appeared to be controlled by the Uchiha's Sharingan, Naruto thought that it would have made sense for Naruto to release the Mizukage using the same Sharingan. Naruto saw some reports on the table, obviously written such that all the wars appeared to have been traced back to the bloodlines with Kekkei Genkai. He frowned. Was the stupid Uchiha trying to start a civil war in Kiri? What in the world is that man trying to achieve? Naruto decided against waiting for the Uchiha to actually start the civil war and used one of the unbreakable and unnoticeable illusions he knew how to use with his Kekkei Genkai to look like a plain black-haired teen with forest green eyes, not yet wanting the Uchiha to know of his existence. He melded out of the glass window behind the Mizukage, closing the distance soundlessly and placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. The Uchiha flinched and quickly hid the control he had over the Mizukage by making the markings in the Mizukage's eyes vanish, at the same time giving the owner of the body more control over himself. The Mizukage spun around to face the intruder, preparing to call in the 2 swordsmen that stood guard at his door. Before he could do that, the taller figure loomed impossibly over him, the green of his eyes shifting to red as Tomo formed by breaking away from the pupils to form comma-like markings in his eyes. These eyes morphed further to reveal a pair of Mangekyo Sharingan with a pattern identical to that of the masked man. The Uchiha took full control over the Mizukage who had become his puppet, causing the pattern of the Mangekyo to form in the Mizukage's eyes. The 2 pairs of eyes stared into one another. The ones belonging to the teen were slightly bored while the Uchiha seethed angrily at how his eyes have somehow been replicated. The controller started grumbling under his breath. Naruto's close proximity allowing him to hear everything, must have been Bakashi. He probably let a medic nin or something use the cells found in my other eye to make artificial copies of my eyes and implanted it into this brat. Though I wonder why his eyes were green before. If I had known that the idiot would kill Rin, I would never have let him have my eye. Minato-sensei was useless too. Kiroi Senko, what a joke. He was too slow to save Rin. Naruto raised an eyebrow, thinking quietly, so my life was not the only one that the cradle robber had ruined, huh? Naruto was not really that surprised, but he compared the information that the masked man had just revealed with the information he had about Minato's genin team. There were 2 boys and a girl. One was the prodigy, the other was the hard-working one. The girl knew a bit of medical ninjutsu and was a support-type shinobi. The first was Hitaki Kakashi, most likely the Bakashi that the Uchiha mentioned. The hard-working one was an Uchiha with different ideals from the rest of his clan, a boy named Uchiha Obito who was said to have died at the Kanabi Bridge during the Third Shinobi War. Their medic was a girl called Nohara Rin, who died a while after Obito. From what the Uchiha had said about giving Kakashi his eye, I can already deduce that this person is actually Uchiha Obito. Naruto shouted mentally, alerting Kurama who merely shook his head fondly at the intelligent child. Let me guess, you are Uchiha Obito, Naruto said offhandedly, watching for his reaction. Obito flinched violently, glaring at Naruto with the appearance of a trapped animal. Obito's heartbeat sped up as he stared at the child hiding under an illusion. Obito looked as though he was beginning to hyperventilate. How did you know? Obito screeched. You are too obvious, Naruto replied with a click of his tongue. Obito flinched violently, glaring at Naruto with the appearance of a trapped animal. Obito's heartbeat sped up as he stared at the child hiding under an illusion, he did not know that. Obito looked as though he was beginning to hyperventilate. How did you know? Obito screeched. You are too obvious, Naruto replied with a click of his tongue. Tell me, the Uchiha growled in annoyance. You basically told me that you were on the team of Namikaze Minato with Hitaki Kakashi and Nohara Rin. I just connected the dots. Besides, you just proved the theory, Naruto replied, amusement shining in his eyes. Obito paled. He did not think that he had muttered that aloud. Who would have thought that he of all people would end up exposing his identity? He scowled at his own idiocy, preparing to call Zetsu to fix the problem and wipe the memory of the raven-haired teen before him. So you hate Namikaze Minato? Naruto asked to reconfirm what he had figured out. Of course, I hate Konaha on the whole, Obito said, confused by the fact that the strange teen who somehow had his Sharingan was asking such a question. Is this teen not a Konaha nin? Obito asked himself curiously. Naruto frowned. I would honestly rather not be a shinobi of Konaha, though I do not have much of a choice in the matter. Obito was about to further interrogate the boy, but he was pushed out of the mind of the jinchuriki by Naruto before he could say more. I believe that I will see you soon, Obito, Naruto said simply when he finally found out how to remove the control Obito had on the Mizukage while just finding out that the Mizukage was a jinchuriki. Naruto made eye contact with the body of the Mizukage, pushing chakra from his eyes which invaded the older boy's chakra system. Naruto easily wrested control from Obito before releasing the Mizukage from his own control. Naruto kept the Mizukage under a Sharingan genjutsu such that Obito could not attempt to control the boy again. Naruto dropped the illusion that hid his form just as the eyes of the Mizukage, who Naruto now remembered was called Karatachi Yagura, snapped open. What the hell? Yagura grumbled as he rubbed his temples. Yagura looked disoriented as he looked around in search of Obito, whose eyes was the last thing he remembered seeing. What do you remember? Naruto asked Yagura when he noticed the confusion rolling off the older boy. A weird Uchiha with a strange Sharingan, Yagura said dully. Then, Yagura racked his head, oh no. I almost caused a civil war in Kiri. Naruto sighed, so Yagura did remember what happened. Yagura turned to Naruto with a grateful smile, thank you so much. I will forever be in your debt. Naruto felt awkward as the older boy kneeled at his feet. Naruto waved Yagura off, a light blush of embarrassment dusting his cheeks. I just happened to be nearby, Naruto said dismissively. Yagura seemed to ignore what Naruto had said, rising to his feet and asking, how may I repay you? Naruto raised an eyebrow. You do not need to repay me. It would be convenient for me to have your aid when necessary, though, Naruto told Yagura simply. Of course, I would do anything, Yagura vowed. Yagura decided to take it up a notch and sliced the palm of his own left hand with a kunai. I, Karatachi Yagura, declare my eternal allegiance to. Yagura trailed off, not knowing the name of the younger boy. Kagami Naruto, the blonde stated after a sigh of annoyance. Naruto did want Yagura as an ally, especially since he was a jinchuriki, but this was definitely severe overkill. He just wanted the guy to agree to help him, not basically declare to serve him for life. Kagami Naruto, Yagura finished with a flourish. The blood that had pooled on the floor began to glow an unearthly blue and form a complex seal. Naruto sighed, muttering under his breath, yep, definitely a blood vow. An unbreakable contract between jinchuriki. Extreme overkill indeed. Naruto took the kunai from the older boy's extended hand, using it to slash his own left palm. Naruto purposely stopped his Uzumaki healing factor from stemming the blood flow and held his own bleeding hand above the glowing seal, allowing his blood to drip onto it. He waited until a significant amount had joined the glowing blood before he said his part. Naruto completed the contract with one sentence, I, Kagami Naruto, accept your vow, Karatachi Yagura. Naruto's blood blended with the glowing blood on the ground, causing the seal to change color until it became a divine gold. The two jinchuriki clasped their bleeding hands together, causing the blood dripping from both of their hands in tandem to also glow gold. The seals on the ground seemed to converge into a blob that separated into two to rest on their wrists. The golden blotches began to take shape, forming matching contact seals on their wrists. Yagura got a fox that encircled his wrist, a sign that he was the one of lower status according to the contract made. Naruto got a turtle on his inner wrist, meaning that he was the one who was on the receiving end of the contract and the one it concerns. Both boys had heard from their biju about the blood vow. It enables them to share their powers, teleport to each other and communicate telepathically over long distances when it is a long-term contract, which was so in their case as their contract basically lasted as long as Naruto was alive, which is forever. It is only applicable between jinchuriki. Yagura was informed about Naruto's status as Kyuubi jinchuriki after he had been released from Obito's mind control by Isobu. Naruto glanced at the clock and paled. "See you soon, Yagura," Naruto called out as he melted into a mirror, barely able to catch Yagura's infuriated growls as he burnt the papers on his desk with a minor fire jutsu. Oh, see you," Yagura replied as he rifled through the papers with a scowl on his face. Naruto quickly ran into the corridor and visualized the mirror in his room. His surroundings shifted and swirled, leaving the boy standing in front of a glossy surface that showed a silver image of his room. He walked out of the monotonous silver world and into his bedroom, quickly changing his clothes. Thankfully, he finished just in time to hear Kushina call his name from where she was downstairs. Naruto walked down the stairs with a sigh. "I'm coming, Ka-san." The very next day, Naruto entered the mirror realm again. He went to the one that leads into Gaara's room, only to see that his friend was holding a knife to his wrist and applying a lot of force. From what Naruto could tell, the sand was in fact the only thing that prevented the red-haired boy from dismembering his entire hand from his arm. "It's no use," Naruto heard Gaara mumble, "the sand gets in the way." Just as he was about to intervene, a rather feminine male with sandy blonde hair and violet eyes walked into the room. Naruto recognized this man as Yashimaru, Gaara's uncle and the only person that said boy trusted other than himself. Naruto decided to watch and see how his friend's uncle would handle the situation. "Gaara-sama," Yashimaru shouted, sounding alarmed. Gaara spun around in surprise, relaxing slightly when he noticed that it was Yashimaru. "As a member of your medical team under Kekkei-sama's command, it is my duty to protect you from harm. Please do not attempt such a thing, though your sand would just stop it anyway," Yashimaru said with a small smile on his face, rubbing the back of his head and sounding slightly sheepish as he said the last part. "I'm sorry, Yashimaru," Gaara told his uncle apologetically with his head tilted to face the ground. The son of the Kekkei paused, seeming to contemplate something. "Do injuries hurt?" Gaara asked, looking up at his uncle apprehensively. "Oh, you mean this?" Yashimaru questioned in surprise as a hand moved to touch his bandaged forehead. "It does hurt a little, but it's nothing serious," Yashimaru said reassuringly. Gaara kept quiet again, before looking up with a confused look on his face. "Nay, Yashimaru? Hi?" Yashimaru turned to face Gaara. "What exactly is pain?" Gaara inquired curiously. A bead of sweat formed on the boy's forehead as he brought his hands up to his face, starting at the palms of his hands as he continued, "I've never been injured, so I wonder what it's like." Yashimaru folded his arms and tapped his chin, his eyes taking on a faraway look as he contemplated how he should go about explaining the concept of pain to a child that was unlikely to ever have to experience it. How should I put it?" Yashimaru said as his eyes swiveled back to the small child who has begun to look at him with an expression that told volumes about how much the boy wanted to understand, afflictive, or even dreadful, like when you're beaten or cut. In short, your body enters an unbearable state where you feel as though you are unable to stay your usual self. Yashimaru began to scratch the back of his neck sheepishly, something that seemed like a nervous habit of his as he concluded, "It's not something that I can explain very well, but the best way to describe it is that it is an unpleasant feeling." Gaara was silent as he watched the man quietly, his voice almost a whisper when he asked, "Yashimaru, then, do you hate me?" Yashimaru felt his movements still as his breath hitched, stunned by his nephew's words and staring at him for a while in surprise. "Silly child," Naruto's eyes widened as he heard Yashimaru's thoughts, "it's not you that I hate. It is your idiot of a father who sealed the tanuki in you before you were born. You are not to blame for any of this. It's all Rasa's fault." Naruto filed away the knowledge for later use as he continued to watch with anticipation. In life, there are times where you hurt people and get hurt by others. But it's not that easy to dislike someone simply because of such a reason, Yashimaru explained with a gentle smile adorning his features. Gaara looked up at Yashimaru with a smile that seemed to radiate happiness as he said excitedly, "Thank you, Yashimaru. I think that I finally understand what pain is." Yashimaru decided to humor the child. "Oh? Is that so? Does that mean that I'm injured, just like everyone else?" Gaara asked. Yashimaru felt his eyes snap to Gaara's face, feeling only confusion and surprise. "I always feel pain," Gaara mumbled as his hand moved to clutch at his chest, right over his heart. "Although it doesn't bleed, this part hurts, so much." Gaara said, a pained smile overtaking his features as his non-existent eyebrows furrowed. Yoshimaru's smile slipped off of his face as he knelt in front of his nephew, gently prying the knife from Gaara's tight grip. He held the knife professionally, his pinky looped through the ring at the base of the hilt of the knife and his pointer finger delicately supporting the knife. Yoshimaru brought the knife to his right hand, his left hand being his dominant hand, and nicked his ring finger shallowly. Having cut into a few minor capillaries, his finger began to drip. Yoshimaru's actions elicited a gasp from the small child who stopped in front of him. Gaara watched, mesmerized by the dripping blood, before shaking off his fascination and frowning at his uncle. When injuries are inflicted upon the physical body, it bleeds. They look painful, but the pain wears off over time while the wound can also be healed faster through the use of medical aids, Yoshimaru explained, making Gaara's eyes widen. Yoshimaru lifted his uninjured hand to his heart. What's more serious are emotional scars. They are the hardest to heal. Emotional scars? Gaara echoed. Physical and emotional scars are very different, Yoshimaru explained. Unlike physical injuries, no ointment is available for emotional wounds. Gaara's face fell as his hand dropped from his chest. There is only one cure for heartache, Yoshimaru told the silent child that stood in front of him. However, as inconvenient as it may seem, the cure can only be administered by someone other than yourself. Gaara looked up hopefully, asking quietly, "What is it?" Yoshimaru's head turned so that he faced the photo of his sister, his eyes proceeding to drift from the image of his deceased sister to her precious son as a smile crept into his face. "It's love." "Love?" Gaara repeated, his voice laced with confusion. "Yes." Yoshimaru gave him a close-eyed smile. How can I receive that?" Gaara asked, stuttering as he looked up at his uncle with a baffled expression. Yoshimaru felt a twinge in his heart. This boy had never experienced love from anyone other than me. He never knew what it was in the first place. No child deserves to be treated like this. Naruto heard the thoughts belonging to the blonde uncle of his friend, agreeing wholeheartedly with his words. Naruto would have received the same treatment, maybe even worse, from the people of Konaha if the Yondaime Hokage had not given that speech after the Kyuubi attack. For that reason, Naruto felt just the slightest bit grateful even though he would not have had been placed in that situation if the man had left his family alone in the first place. "You are already receiving it, Gaara-sama," Yoshimaru told his red-haired nephew. "Huh? Love is care and devotion that you feel for those around you," Yoshimaru explained before trailing off, a sadder undertone in his voice as he continued, "Like the feeling that my sister had for you." Gaara's cheeks flushed in anticipation as he stared at his uncle, waiting for him to tell him more about his mother. "I believe that she loved you very much," Yoshimaru told the boy. Shukaku of Suna is a living spirit that primarily specializes in attacks. The automatic defense that your sand grants you is proof of her maternal affection. Your mother's will remained within your sand to protect you. Gaara also began to stare at the photo as Yoshimaru spoke to the image of his sister, Nei-san. "Even after your death, you wanted to be there for Gaara-sama." Yoshimaru, "About today." "Thank you," Gaara said shyly. "What for?" Yoshimaru asked with a raised eyebrow. "For stopping me," Gaara said with a grateful smile. "You're very welcome. After all, Gaara-sama is my precious person," Yoshimaru told the boy as he began to suck on his finger, his face twisting slightly at the stinging feeling from the cut. "Nay, Yoshimaru, may I ask you for a favor?" the 4-year-old asked excitedly. "What is it?" Yoshimaru asked with an indulgent smile. "I want some ointments," Gaara told the man. Gaara skipped through the streets with a bag of ointments in hand. He did not notice his blonde friend who followed him silently whilst hiding within the shadows cast by the low-hanging full moon. Naruto had sent his clone to show up at the dinner table and sneak the food away while using an illusion to hide it and make it seem as though it ate the food. Kushina did not suspect a thing, having assumed that the boy had not unlocked his chakra yet. Gaara stopped at the door of one of the boys he had injured accidentally earlier that day, hesitating before he knocked thrice with a shy smile on his face. "Here are some ointments," Gaara told the boy who peeked through the gap made by the door. "Go away, you monster," was all the child said to Gaara before he slammed the door shut, the series of clicks telling anyone close enough to hear that he had booked the door shut. Gaara's face fell, his smile turning upside down and his eyebrow ridges furrowing as his eyes welled with unshed tears. Why me? Why is it always only me? Gaara mumbled to himself, walking a distance away before being lifted off the ground by a cloud of his sand. Gaara sat on the roof of Yoshimaru's house, a place where the boy just naturally felt secure at. The redhead watched the drunks get into fights, the clouds drift through the sky and his sand made various shapes in the air. He did not pay attention to his surroundings and thus did not sense the approach of his best friend, his only friend. Naruto approached his older friend and sat next to him, surprising the boy whose sand rose to defend the boy from possible danger. "Hello, Gaara," Naruto greeted simply. "Naruto," Gaara said in relief, the sand dropping to the ground and gathering near to the pair as a safe ring of sand surrounded them. "How have you been?" Naruto asked despite knowing the answer. "Terrible. Everyone except Yoshimaru hates me in this village. Not even Toussaint, Tamari or Kankuro care. I feel so lonely," Gaara said miserably. "At least you're here now, Naruto," Gaara said, his face brightening, "and I learned what pain and love are." "Did you?" Naruto asked his friend with a small smile. "Yes, I have an emotional wound that Yoshimaru can help me heal," Gaara said excitably as he touched his heart. "Yoshimaru loves me." Naruto smiled at his fellow jinchuriki. "Do you love me too? You are one of my precious people, you know?" Gaara asked hopefully. "I am honored to be precious to you. I care about you too. You are also one of my precious people," Naruto told Gaara with a small smile as his older brother surfaced in his mind. Gaara smiled hugely before asking excitedly, "Will you promise to stay my friend forever? Can you promise to be with me forever? I don't want to be alone anymore. Please?" "Of course. I would even vow to never leave you if you'd like," Naruto told Gaara seriously. Gaara's eyes widened when he heard Shukaku tell him something useful for once. "Brat, he's talking about making a blood oath. He's a jinchuriki too, the jinchuriki of Kyuubi. Blood oaths are unbreakable contracts between jinchuriki. If he says that he is willing to vow to never leave you, he's serious about it. Besides, he's a Kagami. I like him. You'd better accept it unless you want me to kill you." Shukaku proceeded to threaten the child that held him menacingly. Naruto heard what the tanuki told Gaara and sighed, "Quit it, Shukaku." Surprisingly, to Gaara, the tanuki obeyed and shut up. Gaara stared at the other jinchuriki in awe. No one had managed to shut the tanuki up before. Moreover, it had to be an achievement to make one of the biju say that they liked you. Gaara could not help but wonder what the name, Kagami, implied. "Yes, please," Gaara squeaked. Naruto smiled and made a cut in Gaara's palm before the boy, or the sand, could react, making the boy hiss in pain once it registered. Gaara had no pain tolerance whatsoever due to the automatic perfect defense granted to him by his mother before she died, but he watched in wonder as his blood began to drip from the shallow superficial injury. He looked up after a while to see that the boy sitting beside him was also bleeding from his right palm. "I, Kagami Naruto, pledge to be the companion of Sabaku no Gaara for the rest of my life," Naruto said formally. "I, Sabaku no Gaara, pledge to be the companion of Kagami Naruto for the rest of my life," Gaara said, copying the blonde who seemed to know what he was doing. The two jinchuriki clasped their right hands together in what seemed to be a handshake as the growing puddle of blood that pooled between them began to glow with a golden hue. Gaara watched in astonishment as the glowing golden blood proceeded to rise from the roof and gather in a vaguely spherical blob before separating into two smaller globs. Gaara watched in stupefaction as the globule of glowing gold settled over each of their right wrists and landed with a splash. The shapeless blotches of golden light began to become more defined and eventually shaped into animal tattoos. Naruto got a raccoon dog on his right inner wrist while Gaara got a fox on his left inner wrist. These were of the same size and slightly bigger than Naruto's existing contract marking from Yagura. Gaara admired his new tattoo-like contract mark. He traced the lines that made up the intricate, lifelike contract marking of a fox that laid on his wrist. He felt a strange but potent power course through him, a power that was not his own. Before he could ask about it, Naruto answered the question. "The contract gives us the ability to share our powers, teleport to the location of our counterpart. In this case, you can teleport to where I am and communicate telepathically over long distances. The teleportation is one-way method of transportation, But you can use my Kekkei genkai to return to your previous location once I figure out how to make mirrors to exit the mirror realm while I am still inside, Naruto explained to the boy, seeing no reason to hide his identity from the person that he had sworn to stay with and had sworn to stay beside him in return. It was not like Gaara would not have eventually found out about his abilities, considering their telepathy. If telepathy is one of the abilities granted by the contract, why were you able to talk in my mind before we made the contract? Gaara asked the blonde curiously. It's one of my Kekkei genkai, Naruto said with a shrug. It had always come naturally to me to read people's minds and talk to them mentally. You can learn how to do it too if you want. Our contract allows for it. Gaara nodded at Naruto's reply. Mind showing me how to communicate telepathically? Naruto almost laughed at that. You don't need to do much. Just unblock your mind from me and I will let you into my mind, Naruto explained. Don't worry, you can still keep things from me. I won't pry, Naruto promised. Wouldn't that make it easier for mind readers like the Yamanaka to intrude on my thoughts? Gaara asked, his voice laced with confusion. Nope. In fact, it's the opposite. This prevents others from being able to enter our minds unless we allow them to, as our mental link will practically be a constant telepathic connection. The Yamanaka cannot enter minds that are already under the influence of a telepathic connection. Their abilities are not like my Kekkei genkai, Naruto explained to his friend. Gaara nodded and followed his friend's instructions, trying to open his mind to his friend and establish a connection between them. He concentrated, a bead of sweat forming on his eyebrow ridge. When the two boys made eye contact, Gaara felt something in his mind click. Gaara blinked in confusion. Did it work? Gaara wondered. Yep, it worked, Naruto said in confirmation in his mind. I did not expect for him to get it on the first try. Naruto thought to himself, which to Gaara felt different from when Naruto was projecting his thoughts, as it was not as attention-grabbing and even softer. Do I seem that incapable? Gaara feigned a hurt tone, deciding to try to properly project his thoughts to his blonde friend as Naruto had done before. Maybe, Naruto said out loud with a snicker. Gaara growled light-heartedly, tackling Naruto to the ground where they proceeded to wrestle playfully. Naruto won, much to Gaara's disappointment. Naruto got up onto his feet, pulling a slightly out-of-breath Gaara up with him. Your uncle's here. I think that you should heed this piece of advice. Always look underneath the underneath. Try not to do the obvious thing and believe everything you see and hear. Question it and find out the truth before you come to a conclusion, Naruto informed the other boy telepathically, ending off his long almost speech sagely. What's that supposed to mean? Gaara asked in confusion. You will know. Just watch out, Naruto said simply before a mirror appeared underneath him and he melted into it, the mirror vanishing once he had finished sinking into the mirror realm. Gaara sighed. Stop being so cryptic, Naruto. I don't understand. I'm not being cryptic. I just have a feeling that you will find this piece of advice useful, Naruto replied simply, making Gaara roll his eyes. Yeah, whatever, Gaara said dismissively as he sensed his uncle walking toward him with what seemed to be one of Naruto's abilities. Gaara checked to see if anything was out of place. Scent? Hidden by the smell of sand. Check. Blood? Evaporated into the glowing golden substance that now looked like a tattoo on his wrist. Check. Contract marking? Concealed by the sand that I spread over it. Check. Cut that Naruto used to make the contract? Healed by what had to be Naruto's healing factor. Check. Leftover belongings? None. Gaara relaxed, continuing to look over the village with a full bag of ointments at his side, and tried not to show any outward reaction when Naruto made fun of his utter paranoia. He only snarked back that there was nothing wrong with exercising caution, to which Naruto sent him a mental shrug of indifference. It was hard to act as though he did not notice Yashimaru when he was already having to suppress his urge to twitch with agitation at the suspense as he waited for Yashimaru to speak up. Gaara suddenly managed to tap into Yashimaru's thoughts. Kekkei-sama is so cruel. To even attempt to kill his own son, unbelievable. Gaara flinched visibly, spinning around to stare at the man standing behind him. He had always known that his father disliked him, but to hear that the assassination attempts that had been thrown at him were all his father's doing was way too much of a burden to bear. Yashimaru bore a sad smile. Let's go home, Gaara-sama. It's late, Yashimaru said, the melancholy air that he carried dissipating in an instant as his aura became warm and welcoming. Gaara nodded shortly and stood to his feet, brushing off the dust that clung to his pants. He picked up the bag and followed the man quietly. So they did not accept the medical ointments? Yoshimaru asked, to which Gaara only replied with a subtle shake of the head that he barely caught. I see. It's all right, I'll always be here for you, Yoshimaru promised his nephew. Gaara believed him. His words were sincere with no underlying meaning. Yoshimaru's eyes revealed none of the hate that he saw in those of the others in the village. He followed Naruto's advice. There was nothing for him to lose and everything to gain from listening to the advice of the other jinchuriki. There will not be any harm done simply because he chose to be more cautious. Gaara walked through the moonlit streets, mostly empty with no one about besides himself and several drunks. The circular form of the full moon hung low in the sky, like the night of the previous full moon Yoshimaru where he had been taught about love, pain and bonds. The night he found out that he was the precious person of two separate individuals brought him joy whenever he thought about it. He always expected to wake up one day from a twisted dream where he has what he wanted so desperately, only to find out that it was all false. His days felt so surreal that he actually forgot about the hate he received from the other citizens of Sanagakure no Sato. In his daze, Gaara did not see where he was going and bumped into a drunk pedestrian. He was about to apologize to the man for his carelessness, but the man spoke before he could. Watch where you're going. The man slurred, before noticing who it was and shivering instantly. The drunk glared at the boy before sneering, oh, so it's just you. Gaara felt a trickle of rage pool in his gut, but he knew that it would not get him anywhere if he killed the stupid man. He kept his head downcast and tried to sidestep the drunk. He almost made it past when the man tried to touch his shoulder, thinking, Gaara-sama is just a brat. I never expected that. I would have thought that he'd be more terrifying. Why's everybody else pissing their pants at the sight of this brat? Hey, you, the man growled. At least apologize. Gaara turned around to see that the man's eyes shine with hate but also a bit of fear, just like those of everyone else in this village. Hearing the man call him a brat mentally was already something he found annoying, but for him to act so cocky while ordering him to apologize when it was mostly the man's fault while glaring at him with those eyes, was just too much for Gaara to handle. Why me? Why is it always me? Gaara asked mentally, not noticing that he was projecting his thought to Naruto. Relax, Gaara, Naruto told him soothingly. He is not deserving of your time. Gaara averted his eyes again and tried to walk past the man again, only for the stupid man to tighten his grip on Gaara's shoulder angrily. How dare this brat try to walk away without apologizing, the man thought. Rage fueling his actions and preventing him from thinking clearly. Gaara frowned and turned around, annoyance clear on his features. He did not expect the anger that had been pooling in his gut to suddenly bubble forth at the sight of the man's facial expression and malicious intent towards himself. He growled angrily, his sand rising threateningly as his frown became a scowl. The man gulped. Before he could run away, the sand quickly engulfed him and squeezed. The man exploded, leaving a bit of bloody entrails on the sidewalk and a pool of blood where the same had been. Gaara's sand loosened from its semi-solid state, causing the blood and remains of the man to fall to the ground with a splat. The wispy cloud of sand returned to Gaara where they continued to swirl threateningly. Gaara walked past the bloody mess he had created without emotion. It was not like he had not killed before. Besides, the men that gave him those looks were not even worthy of being called human in the first place. This allowed him to kill them without remorse. Naruto was not that bothered by the fact that Gaara had killed the Suna shinobi. He was more concerned over what said boy's father would do when he found out that his son had killed one of his men. He knew that the man felt no love for his children and that the man was bound to do something foolish in an attempt to gauge Gaara's worth. This was the reason why Naruto was observing the man within the glass of the window. Rasa sat at his table, silently tackling the ever-present mountain of paperwork on his desk. He sighed in annoyance as his golden sand seemed to rise of its own accord and shredded a particularly idiotic request from the council. This was the scene that one of his sons Anbu guard walked into. I can see where Gaara-sama got his temper from. The shinobi thought nervously as he cleared his throat to get the attention of the man seated in front of him, making Naruto burst into laughter. Rasa sighed, looking up at his shinobi with a frown, this has better be important. I'm busy. The man fidgeted, stuttering slightly as he spoke, it was Gaara-sama. He killed Yashira. Rasa frowned. Sure, He had condoned it whenever the shinobi he sent to kill Gaara were slaughtered without mercy. However, this man, a particularly skilled shinobi, at that, had not attacked Gaara, so the boy's actions could not just be classified as self-defense. It was simply unwarranted bloodshed. A complete waste of talent. Gaara was beginning to get out of line and he briefly wondered if the boy even had any semblance of control over the Ichibi. Naruto had allowed Gaara to hear the thought of the Anbu who had believed that Gaara's temper was inherited from his father, but blocked out his own train of thought that followed what he heard as well as Rasa's thoughts. Naruto frowned, knowing that whatever the man was planning to do would be started now. He watched patiently as the case cage sent the Anbu to get Yoshimaru. Yoshimaru, I have to ask you a favor. Please go and test Gaara's control over the Ichibi, Rasa ordered despite his choice of words. May I ask why? Yoshimaru questioned, trying his best to not bristle as he spoke to his brother-in-law, who had murdered his sister, his own wife, and shunned his son, whom he had made a jinchuriki before he was even born. He killed one of my best men without provocation. I need to know whether he is worth being kept around. You can use any method you deem necessary. Test his mental resolve, his emotional state. Corner him psychologically by talking about his mother. Do anything you want to judge his worth, Rasa explained. You have a chance to torture your sister's murderer. Make good use of it, Rasa told the man, getting out of his chair to pat the man on the shoulder. Idiot, you were Nei-san's murderer. Gaara did not do anything. You killed her, Yoshimaru thought furiously. It seems that Rasa is in denial of what he had done to his wife, to blame his own son for it. Naruto mused thoughtfully, careful to keep his mental barrier up so that Gaara did not hear it. Naruto knew that the experience was necessary for his friend's development, regardless of how painful it would doubtlessly be for the boy. Naruto winced when Gaara killed another stupid shinobi, this one completely sober and had returned from the village after a mission. He had glared at Gaara with his arms crossed, leaning against a wall as he had watched the boy pass. His thoughts, however, were far from pleasant. Oh, it's the monster. He killed an innocent bystander this time. Always knew that he had it in him, the man had thought victoriously, angering the redhead. Naruto frowned. This particular shinobi had really rattled Gaara. The boy was unlikely to heed his advice when he was in this sort of state. He decided that it was all right to remind him. Gaara, Naruto called out, immediately calming the boy down. Remember that I will always be with you. I care, even if these idiots don't. Just remember what I told you, you'll need it very soon. Always look underneath the underneath. Things are not necessarily what they seem to be. Case Kage-sama, Gaara-sama killed another shinobi. It was Teizeki, another Anbu ran into the room, shouting. Rasa sent Yoshimaru a pointed look, while the right-hand man of the case cage only nodded and left the room quickly. Naruto made a small mirror at a place with a perfect view of the roof Gaara was on, thinking over Naruto's strange warning. Naruto observed the now calm boy who sat quietly thinking to himself, having full access to the other boy's thoughts. I hope that Gaara would be alright. Naruto could not help but think, his mental barrier weakening to allow his friend to hear the thought. I will be, Gaara reassured his friend, once again wondering what in the world was going on that Naruto refused to let him know. Barely 3 minutes later, he heard Yoshimaru think, I'm sorry, Gaara-sama. I really do love you. Please forgive me. Gaara froze, spinning on his heel to look for his uncle as he was only able to hear the thoughts of those nearby. Gaara was further surprised when his sand quickly rose to defend him against a volley of kunai. He looked in the direction they were thrown from, only to see a person dressed in the typical Suna Anbu uniform. With the thick flak jacket with shoulder guards, loose-fitting long-sleeved black shirt, black pants, the usual shinobi sandals worn by Anbu of Suna and headgear that came with a cloth mask to hide the face. Gaara could tell neither the person's gender nor their identity. Oh, so it's just one of Two-san's men, Gaara thought blankly as he quickly pinned the person to the wall with his sand. Gaara was about to clench his fist and kill the person, but he thought better of it. It might be a trap, Gaara reasoned. Naruto did tell me to always look underneath the underneath. Gaara walked up to the person who had been completely demobilized by his sand, pulling off their mask with a shaky hand. Underneath the mask was a face that clearly resembled his mother's, with the same fair skin, facial structure and violet eyes. The person wore a faltering smile. Impressive indeed. Gara-sama. It was Yashimaru. Yashimaru. Gara breathed. Why? Why you? Why? Gara muttered incoherently. Love is care and devotion that you feel for those around you. Yashimaru's words seemed to echo in his head. After all, Gara-sama is my precious person. Why? Gara whimpered, a single tear streaking down his face as Yashimaru stayed silent. Always. You were always, only you were my. Gara mumbled, another tear escaping his eyes. It was an order. Yashimaru said simply, gazing at the sky, I was ordered to assassinate you. Gara felt hopeful, so. Yashimaru did not want to do this? By your father, Kekkei-sama, Yashimaru finished. Gara was not that surprised, but it still hurt nonetheless to hear that his father wanted him dead that badly. To-san? Why? Gara sobbed, tears now streaking his cheeks unbidden. You were born to be possessed by the living sand spirit, Shukaku, and had been watched carefully from the very beginning as an experimental subject, Yashimaru explained. However, even up to now, you have shown to be incapable of controlling the powers of the living spirit. Before long, your existence may very well threaten the village. We simply couldn't let that happen. This was something that Gara understood. He had been implanted with Shukaku as a weapon for the village. Ineffective weapons were often cast away and he was no different. Then you had no choice. It was because of father, Gara said, a small smile tugging at his lips as he gazed at his uncle, hope shining in his eyes. No, you're mistaken, Yashimaru spoke, startling Gara. Kekkei-sama was indeed the one to give the order, but I was the one who chose to accept it. I could have declined if I wanted to, Yashimaru lied smoothly while meeting Gara's gaze steadily, leaving Naruto impressed by his acting skills. Gara-sama, I must have always, deep down in my being, resented you. Yashimaru lied, still not breaking eye contact with his nephew. At this point, Gara started feeling dubious. He had heard Yashimaru's thoughts before being attacked, which he had at first dismissed as his hyperactive imagination when he was first attacked. Then the Anbu turned out to be Yashimaru, who had suddenly begun to say things that did not add up. Yashimaru had apologized, which was probably because he was preparing to say all this. In that case, Yashimaru was probably just feeding him lies and half-truths at this point. However, the two were woven together so well that he had trouble distinguishing them. Gara silently thanked Naruto for reminding him to look underneath the underneath. If not for that piece of advice, Gara would have foolishly accepted his uncle's lies. For coming into this world, for stealing away my dear Ne-san. Yashimaru averted his gaze, staring at the starry sky as he thought at the same time, but that was all Rasa's fault. What kind of idiot implants a biju in a fetus while it is still in its mother's womb? What kind of imbecile blames a baby for killing its mother when he was the one who caused the tragedy in the first place? Gara blinked, his eyes already dry as he frowned in confusion at the contradicting claims. Yashimaru met Gara's eyes again and continued even though Gara had already decided that what Yashimaru said from that point was going to be complete bullshit. I tried my best to love you by thinking of you as her memento. That was so in the beginning, but I grew attached to you, Yashimaru thought while saying, but I couldn't. She never wished to give birth to you, Yashimaru told Gara. At least not in this world where she knew that your life would not be happy as long as you held Shukaku. But she did not want to let you die just like that either, Yashimaru thought mournfully. She was sacrificed for this village and died cursing it, Yashimaru continued while thinking, yet she was too kind to think badly of her husband, her true murderer. Perhaps, from then on, I have been carrying never-healing emotional wounds, Yashimaru told Gara while thinking the opposite, but you healed me. Your mother gave you your name, Yashimaru admitted. This child's name is Gara, Yashimaru quoted, before slipping in a lie, a demon that loves only himself. Sorry, Gara-sama, Ne-san. This is necessary, Yashimaru thought ruefully. Love only yourself, love and fight for your own sake. She wished and believed that your existence would be forever as long as you lived so. But she didn't give you that name out of love or concern for you. Yashimaru continued to lie, the words convincing on his tongue as he seemed to scrutinize the beautiful sky idly where he was fighting down his guilt for psychologically cornering his beloved nephew. The name was given to you in the hope of your eternal existence. To let her grudge be carried down, to become known to the world, Yoshimaru lied once more while having a flashback of the day Gaara was born. Kurora was lying on the hospital bed, panting heavily. "Show me my baby's face," Kurora pleaded weakly. The doctor obliged, bring the tiny premature child to her pillow and laying him beside his mother. "What a small, feeble child," Kurora murmured as she looked at her new red-haired son. "No matter what happens, I'll always protect you. Gaara," the woman said lovingly as her heart rate slowed and her breath began to falter. Yoshimaru almost smiled at his memory of his sister's only moment with her precious son. "Your sand truly is all that is left of Ne-san. Why would Rasa ever wish to kill you? His beloved lives within you," Yoshimaru thought, a smile forcing its way onto his face. Naruto sighed from where he was watching the whole thing, muttered while shaking his head, unblocking Gaara from his mind, "I swear that man is silver-tongued. He's so good at lying and acting that he can probably even win some sort of award." Gaara agreed immediately, "I would definitely have believed him if not for your telepathy. Thanks, by the way. You were never loved," Yoshimaru shouted, the cracking of his voice almost unnoticeable. Gaara made eye contact with the man, saying bluntly, "You're an excellent liar. Your skills are being wasted in the medical department." This caused Yoshimaru's eyes to widen as his breath and heart rate sped up significantly. He ignored the fact that he had been exposed and pulled open his vest to reveal a large mound of explosion seal tags. He lit the match and moved to light the paper bombs, shakily accepting his fate. "This is it, please die," Yoshimaru said resignedly with a small smile of farewell. "I'm so very, very sorry, Gaara-sama. You don't need to forgive me," Yoshimaru thought sadly. Just before Yoshimaru could light the tags, the sand that had fallen away at some point during his long series of lies restrained him as they had before. Naruto quickly disabled the seals by breaking the seal arrays with a bit of chakra so that they were useless. Gaara sent him a grateful look of thanks before walking up to his uncle. Gaara hugged Yoshimaru, to the man's surprise, and whispered, "It's all right. I forgive you anyway." Yoshimaru felt his resolve shatter and his heart crack painfully, tears beginning to stream down his cheeks. Yoshimaru knelt, the sand having released him when Gaara hugged him and returned the embrace tightly. The man ignored the stinging feeling in his eyes and threw away his pride, sobbing into the child's embrace and muttering apologies into the crimson hair that he had buried his face in. Naruto smiled at the heartwarming sight. He had helped prevent a tragedy. Naruto knew that if Gaara had had to experience the heartbreak of losing his loved ones as well, he would never have been able to forgive himself. He was glad that he was able to be of help, unlike the day where he was only able to watch helplessly as his parents died before him. For now, Naruto decided to check on Rasa. From where he stood at the outskirts of the village, Rasa sighed in mild relief. Even though he did blame Gaara, somewhat, for his wife's death, he knew deep down that it was mostly his own fault. He also knew that Kurora loved her youngest dearly and would never have wanted Rasa to kill him, but he was just too overcome by grief to think clearly. "Gaara, it seems I have judged you incorrectly. I seem to be a terrible judge of worth after all," Rasa murmured when the explosion he had been waiting for never appeared. Rasa smiled when he noted that the monstrous form of the Ichibi never showed up. "And it seems that you are worth much more than I could have ever imagined, too," Rasa commented. Naruto sighed as he watched the man from the gold dust that the man dusted all over himself just in case, the tiny shiny surfaces perfect for peeking out at the outside world. He perked up when an idea hit him. Why not freak the guy out by talking in his head? Naruto searched through the man's memories quickly and found out what Kurora's voice sounded like. Naruto replicated her voice with the use of his Kekkei genkai and used it to speak in Rasa's mind. "You dismissed Gaara as hopeless? How could you, dear? I had thought better of you. It appears that I was wrong to do so, to see you try to kill my son." Rasa paled and sweated profusely as he said a bit too quickly, "I'm sorry, Kurora. I'll definitely be sure to make it up to him." Rasa began to run in the direction of where he knew Gaara was, hoping against hope that he would be able to mend his relationship with his son and make up for his mistakes. Naruto just snickered as his friend's father ran to fix his wrongs. It seemed that Naruto helped Gaara more than he had expected to be able to. Naruto also decided that it was about time to teach his other contractor how to use their mental link. Naruto had mastered the creation of invisible mirrors and had figured out how to make explosive clay out of his chakra by the time his adoptive parents decided to start his actual training. Naruto used his invisible mirrors, visible to only him, anyway, to travel, also learning how to create them wherever he wanted. This allowed him to practically teleport anywhere. Naruto also managed to learn how to reflect a person's greatest fear and how to make his illusions real. Naruto now sat in the middle of the training ground, listening to Kushina explain the concept of chakra. Ka-san, I was already told to study the concept of chakra, no? Naruto interrupted politely with a raised eyebrow. Yes, but the books did not mention anything that I had mentioned, right? Kushina asked rhetorically. Naruto blinked in confusion. I thought that the books were just a starting point and that I was supposed to study everything else on my own, Naruto admitted. I studied almost everything in the library for that reason. Kushina was shocked. How in the world did the boy manage to read so many books within the span of a year? She had expected that reading the pile of books they had given him would have taken a year, considering that he had only just learned how to read and would definitely read at a slower pace than grown adults. However, the blonde had to be reading at a much faster speed than the average adult if he could even read everything in the library within a year. If it helps, I condensed the lengthy information in the books into concise notes, Naruto supplied not very helpfully, only serving to stun the woman before him. How? Even I have only gone through barely half of the books there. Kushina asked, bewildered. Naruto shrugged, suggesting innocently, magic? The scary thing is, I can actually see myself believing you. Kushina muttered. Okay, so this is how you draw out your chakra. Kushina mumbled as she sat down in front of her son and gestured for him to imitate her movements. Naruto followed obediently, matching her meditational pose perfectly. Kushina watched as he got into position, nodding approvingly when she saw no errors. Good, now relax your body and tune out everything except my voice and your own breathing and heartbeat, Kushina instructed. Naruto relaxed and felt as the world seemed to slip away, purposely tuning out the numerous chakra signatures that he sensed as soon as he entered the meditational state. He also had to stop himself from entering his mindscape as he waited for further instruction. He ended up having a harder time tuning out the sound of Kushina's breathing than he had thought. So, reach deep into yourself and search for a warm feeling. It should be in your tummy. Draw on the feeling and pull it out slowly, Kushina explained, doing it to demonstrate to Naruto how it was done before she opened her eyes to watch Naruto's progress. Naruto nodded once. Don't worry if you don't get it on your first try, no one does. Kushina trailed off and her eyes widened as she saw Naruto glowing with an imperial blue hue and while swirls of gold rolled off his body. Kushina watched, mesmerized, as the strange chakra emanated from her adoptive son's body steadily and in quite a large amount. She gasped when he opened his eyes, the same golden color was swirling in the depths of his eyes. Sending chakra to his eyes without activating his dojutsu made the swirling golden depths within his eyes rise to the surface and become more prominent. Like this? Naruto asked the awestruck woman. Kushina nodded dumbly, her voice almost robotic as she replied, like that. Naruto continued to release his chakra, Kushina finally getting over the shock of seeing Naruto's strange chakra and feeling the pressure it placed on her body. The thought that a 4-year-old child could have enough chakra to make a cage-level shinobi feel like falling to their knees was laughable at best, but this child managed to do it. It felt slightly weaker than the killing intent that the Kyuubi had placed upon her whenever she visited it in her mindscape while she was its jinchuriki, but it was probably stronger considering that it was just chakra without any killing intent involved. You can stop now, Kushina gasped as her knees buckled slightly before she quickly straightened up. You don't want to exhaust your reserves right now, right? It has been 15 minutes already, Databane. Naruto stopped, just as he was told to. He did not feel any drain on his reserves actually, but she did not need to know that. The chakra reserves of those in the Kagami clan have always been expansive. The immortal Kagami even more so. In fact, their chakra reserves were only rivaled by that of us Biju who are made up of chakra. The Uzumaki bloodline that you absorbed only served to make your chakra denser, Kurama explained to his jinchuriki. Oh, Naruto replied intelligently. Why is it that you have 2 different colored chakras? Kushina asked Naruto, forgetting that he probably did not know. It is a trait of your kind. Your base chakra is blue, but it contains chakra of another color, basically the color of the frame of your dojutsu, which is also present the swirling undercurrents in your eyes. I don't understand it myself, but the immortal Kagami have many odd traits that I will likely never come to understand. Kurama explained before seeming to say the last sentence sulkily, which Kushina would have loved to hear. I don't know, Naruto lied smoothly, following Yashimaru's example. Kushina face palmed as she remembered that Naruto could not possibly know. Is it the Kyuubi's chakra? No, that fox's chakra is red, not gold. Moreover, the damned fox would never give out its chakra so freely like that. Besides, Naruto should not even know about the fox. What is it, then? It feels like it is part of his chakra, but it gives off a different feeling from the blue chakra, Kushina pondered. Let's start with chakra control exercises, Kushina said sadistically, knowing that chakra control was the weak point of every person with large chakra reserves. Which was the case for Naruto, if his previous display of chakra was any indication, and jinchuriki, which was the case for Naruto as well. Kushina picked up a random leaf from the ground and pressed it to her forehead, channeling a minuscule amount of chakra to her forehead to make the leaf stick as she explained. This is known as the leaf concentration exercise. All you need to do is channel a small amount of chakra to your forehead to keep the leaf attached, databane. Too little chakra will cause it to fall off, but too much chakra will blow it away. Naruto randomly selected a leaf off the ground and pressed it to his forehead gently. He allowed his eyes to slide shut as he channeled an incredibly small amount of chakra to his forehead and increased the amount until he felt the leaf attached to his forehead. Naruto removed his hand from his forehead and opened his eyes to see Kushina smiling at him. Albeit surprised, Kushina was pleased to see that Naruto's chakra control did not seem to be affected by his massive reserves. Somehow, the boy had only required one attempt to succeed in the exercise. The leaf remained stuck on Naruto's forehead above his eyebrows as he waited for further instruction, his line of sight slightly obscured by the leaf. Good, Kushina praised as she wondered how Naruto, a complete beginner in chakra usage, could so easily manipulate his chakra without the aid of hand seals. You can drop the leaf now, Kushina told the boy who was waiting for her instructions patiently, making her feel awkward. Naruto obeyed, cutting the chakra flow which allowed the leaf to drift to the ground slowly. Kushina put Naruto through the leaf and water exercises, which he also aced on the first try by gauging the chakra first before walking onto the surface. He had everything down in much less than an hour and the day was still young. He was way ahead of schedule as she had expected Naruto to take at least 2 days to get the hang of releasing chakra, at least a week to complete the tree walking exercise and another week for the water walking exercise. He somehow required no practice and was able to get the hang of it immediately. He did not use hand seals to focus his chakra either, for goodness sake. Even though Naruto had practice holding the different hand seals, he never used them for his techniques. In other words, Naruto had such an impressive chakra control that he could manage feats that most required numerous hand seals to use, as the molding of chakra for his Kekkei genkai is actually really complex. With his amazing chakra control, it was actually very easy for him to complete the exercises that Kushina made him do. Since you're so far ahead of schedule, I guess we can just find out your chakra nature first. We will not begin with elemental manipulation until you finish learning the 3 basic academy ninjutsu, though, Kushina told Naruto with a smile on her face. I presume that you know what it means for a person to have a chakra affinity. Kushina confirmed. Of course. In general, every person's chakra has an affinity towards one of the 5 basic nature transformations. Affinity can at times be genetic, or at least common to a particular family. Most members of the Uchiha clan have an affinity towards the fire nature. One's affinity can be determined using pieces of paper made from a special type of tree that is grown and fed with chakra. Shinobi have an easier time learning to create and control a chakra nature that matches their affinity, although even then it may take many years. Shinobi are not limited to the nature they have an affinity for, and it is in fact common for Jonin to have mastered 2 natures. Although it is technically possible to master all 5 natures, it is very rare because of how much training is involved. Senju Hashirama, the Shodem Hokage, Senju Tobarama, the Nidame Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandame Hokage, Orochimaru of the Sannin and Mu, the Nidame Tsuchikage, are the only shinobi known to have done so via normal means. Naruto droned as though reciting from an encyclopedia. That's right, Databane, Kushina said approvingly, before asking, why in the world does it sound like you are reading from a textbook? Origin of Chakra, Chapter 10. Affinities, page 231, Naruto stated blandly. Kushina nodded slowly, surprise evident as she asked, why would you bother to memorize something like that? I didn't, Naruto said blankly. Wait, you have a photographic memory? Kushina said disbelievingly. Or so it seems, Naruto replied with a nonchalant shrug. Kushina shook her head in exasperation. Her adopted son was just full of surprises and she should really start getting used to it, with it seeming as though the surprises would never end. Although Naomi and Natsumi were both 3 as well, neither had learned how to read properly yet. They knew their hiragana to an extent but still could not identify any kanji. Apparently, it was normal for children to only be able to read at the age of 6. Naruto was a very early reader. She had also begun to read bedtime stories to Naomi and Natsumi after their previous birthday, to the twins' delight. Kushina pulled a sheet of chakra paper from her pocket where she kept them just in case of situations like these. She passed it to Naruto without explaining what to do with it. She knew that the boy had to have read about it somewhere. Naruto took it and channeled chakra into the paper without hesitation. Kushina did not know what to expect, but considering that the boy was initially from Iwa and had a parent with the explosion release, she expected something like earth and lightning release. However, what Naruto turned out to have was definitely far from any of her expectations. Even though she had decided not to allow herself to be surprised by the boy's different quirks, she was inevitably shocked by the revelation. Naruto's natural chakra affinity was something that was said to only have been seen in one individual from the beginning of time. The chakra paper had been sliced into 4 pieces, smoothly and neatly divided to be of equal size. The 4 pieces then reacted. The first one wrinkling so much that it seemed to have been crumpled and had little sparks of electricity dancing off it, clearly an incredibly strong lightning affinity. The second one became wet, so much so that the paper itself disintegrated. The third one ignited with a white-hot flame and disintegrated quickly, barely leaving an extremely fine ash that blew away in the wind. The fourth one turned into dirt and crumbled away so quickly that Kushina would have missed it if she were to blink. You have all 5 affinities. Kushina mumbled incredulously. How is that possible? To have more than one natural primary affinity means that you have a Kekkei genkai, but all 5? I don't understand this at all. Kushina muttered to herself. It would mean that Naruto has the Rinnegan, the eyes of the Rikudo Sennin, but I don't see him with purple rippled eyes. In the first place, the Rinnegan is a myth. It doesn't exist. I need help, Kushina began to ramble incoherently. The main clan Kagami had all 5 chakra affinities naturally. It was a reason why their bodies can adapt to every Kekkei genkai and incorporate them into the system, Kurama supplied helpfully, to Naruto. I see. Thanks, Kura-kun, Naruto thanked his friend. No problem, Kit, Kurama replied kindly. Ito, Ka-san? Naruto called out, waving a hand in front of Kushina's face. Huh? Kushina snapped out of her rant and began scratching her head in embarrassment. I'm so sorry, Databane, Kushina apologized sheepishly. What's next? Naruto asked the woman in front of her. I'll teach you the 3 basic academy jutsu, Kushina explained to Naruto. Oh, they are the Kawarimi, Bunshin and Henge no Jutsu, right? Naruto asked. Hi, Databane, Kushina replied with a smile, ruffling Naruto's hair. Naruto's hair is slightly lighter than Minato's and not nearly as spiky, which was why it got very messy after she ruffled it. Naruto shook his head, combing his hair back into place with his fingers as a slight frown marred his young face. Ka-san, Naruto cried out in outrage. Kushina laughed before her expression turned serious again. Okay, so these are the hand seals for the Bunshin no Jutsu, Kushina said while demonstrating slowly, ram, snake, tiger. Kushina made 2 perfect illusionary clones, one on either side of her. But they feel different from you and the clones are way too obvious, Naruto commented with a raised eyebrow. What's the point? Kushina shrugged. I always did say that the academy standards were way too low, but Minato had always insisted that we need civilian-born shinobi too. Besides, there's an academy graduation test to eliminate those who really cannot make it, in which these 3 jutsu are tested, which in my opinion is actually pointless, as these jutsu are ones that require very little chakra and cannot be used by those with large chakra reserves if they do not have an extremely high degree of chakra control. After that, there's a genin test where other skills are tested to sieve out the ones that have no chance of surviving in the shinobi world. That is also how some amazing shinobi do not manage to pass and have to get into the shinobi forces through other means. Like through Anbu? Naruto suggested. Yep, that's an option. There are also others, but that's the most common one, Kushina affirmed. Naruto frowned. What a stupid system. If shinobi start off that weak, even the more experienced genin on C ranks outside the village are screwed if they have to face a missing nin. And that's exactly what I told Minato. He just waved it off and said that he would only send the stronger genin out and that their Jonin sensei were capable enough. Kushina huffed. Not my problem, Naruto muttered with a shrug. Kushina sighed. Just do the jutsu. Naruto nodded, doing the ram, snake and tiger seals in quick succession and imitating her usage of chakra. He separated a very small amount of chakra into 2 and molded them into 2 clones on either side of him. The clones looked exactly like him in every way, though their lack of shadows and scent was obvious. Kushina surveyed her adopted son's first try at making clones, nodding approvingly before she decided to make it harder for the boy in front of her, who was quickly proving himself to be a prodigy. Now without hand seals, Kushina commanded. Naruto almost laughed at her idea of difficult. Manipulating his chakra without the use of hand seals came naturally to him. He was just humoring her by copying her movements. Even so, he decided to continue to humor her. Naruto easily recalled the amount of chakra necessary and how it was molded before following it exactly. Naruto let a small amount of chakra trickle from him and mold itself into another pair of clones. He looked his clones over for flaws before nodding when he saw none, turning to Kushina for her approval. Kushina was mind blown. Was there anything that Naruto could not do on his first try? Drawing out his chakra for the first time was something that came naturally to the boy, along with chakra control, which would normally be impossible for one with his massive chakra reserves and status as a jinchuriki. All jutsu just looked easy when he did it. Hell, Kushina herself had never been able to do the Bunshin no Jutsu when she was still in the academy. She had sneakily replaced them with water clones. Thankfully, she had not been caught. Kushina returned to reality and gave Naruto yet another set of instructions while demonstrating. Now is the Henge no Jutsu. I will transform into Minato, you can transform into whatever you want. The hand seals are dog, boar and ram. Naruto noted that the transformation was illusionary and that it could be improved if it were to be turned into an actual transformation. Naruto decided to combine it with the concept of the solid clone technique Kage Bunshin no Jutsu and hope for the best. In his own time, of course. Naruto imitated the hand seals and visualized the Sandame Tsuchikage, molding his chakra in the same way and coating a thin layer of chakra which was more spiritual energy than physical energy on his body. He shaped it into his great-granduncle and stared at Kushina expectantly. His henge was flawless, even if the last time he had met his great-granduncle was 4 years ago and had only seen 1 or 2 pictures of the man since then. Kushina almost fainted. Naruto, who was supposed to have no idea about his heritage, had henge-ed into the Tsuchikage. Iwa is the longtime enemy of Konaha. Naruto should not have been able to find out. Interesting choice. Naruto, may I ask why you chose to henge into the Tsuchikage instead of your father? Kushina stuttered out. Naruto played innocent. I don't know, Ka-san. It just felt right. Kushina sighed. She seemed to be doing that a lot these days. I don't want to bring myself to care anymore. Now without hand seals, Naruto decided to surprise her further. He transformed flawlessly into Yagura, complete with staff and battle outfit. The manipulation of chakra for the technique was simple enough. Kushina stared for a full minute, the gears in her head turning at full speed. Naruto knew the Mizukage? Not possible. He had never left the village and she had seen him every day since he was brought to Konaha. There were no photos of the Mizukage. Not in Kiri, not elsewhere. Not even the best information gatherers managed to get pictures or sketches of him down. She herself had only seen him when the cage of the 5 great hidden villages convened within the Land of Iron. Even then, it was only once when she had been there as her husband's personal guard and had left Kage Bunshin to take care of their children. Minato had actually left behind his Hiraishin seal when they had gone there, which allowed them to get there and return within the day of the meeting without their clones running out of chakra. Kushina decided that there was no point in asking. Naruto was strange in his own way and knew and saw things that he probably was never supposed to. Nothing he did ever followed logic. Next is Kawarimi no Jutsu. The hand signs are tiger, boar, ox, dog and snake. Kushina told Naruto while demonstrating the hand seals and replacing herself with a pebble on the other side of the training ground. Instead of looking around for Kushina and appearing confused as she had expected Naruto to do, the blonde immediately turned to face her before the smoke from the technique had even fully died out. Kushina was surprised. Naruto did not fumble around looking for her. Even if he had natural sensor abilities, he would still have had to search for her chakra signature. It was almost as though Naruto had either caught her movement or had better senses than the average shinobi and was able to detect her breathing. In reality, it was a combination of his sharp eyes, excellent hearing and sensory. Naruto had seen a flash of red where he felt her chakra and heard her breathing, from which was all he needed to be sure that she had moved to her particular position. This all passed through his mind within a nanosecond, which he acted on immediately and spun around to face her. It was a subconscious movement, to not let an enemy get behind his back. He had acted mostly out of instinct. Naruto nodded at the woman and performed the hand seals required, swapping places with Kushina and leaving her disoriented for a second. When Kushina got her bearings, she turned around to face Naruto. The boy stared at her, waiting for her reaction. Replacing with other living beings is an advanced skill. If you were not careful, you could have missed something out, Kushina chided the 4-year-old prodigy. Naruto tilted his head to the side cutely, pouting a little as he pointed out, "Nothing happened, Ka-san. Have more faith in me." Kushina sighed. The boy was right. He got everything down so naturally that getting something wrong during his execution of a technique would have been more strange than anything else. The boy was probably somehow able to use his chakra sensory, which was proving to be quite advanced, to detect the chakra usage of each technique and replicate it perfectly without the need for the Sharingan. His perfect memory coupled with his impressive natural sensor abilities would probably make him as good at copying jutsu as Sharingan users. The woman obviously did not know that the boy actually had the Sharingan as well, but that did not matter at this point. Not much, anyway. Now do it without hand seals. I have no doubt that you will be able to do it without difficulty, but it is an essential skill as a shinobi and I am not supposed to move on until you get it down, Kushina instructed, explaining when he noticed Naruto's bored expression. Naruto sighed and used Kawarimi to replace himself with the pebble that Kushina had replaced herself with earlier, returning the pebble to its initial position. Kushina was no longer fazed by how easily the boy did it. There was very little room for a surprise there. The boy learned how to read at 3 and managed to unlock his chakra, complete the 3 basic chakra control exercises and master the 3 basic academy ninjutsu within the same day and at the age of 4. That had to be some kind of record that even Makoto's miraculous Itachi never managed to beat. That in itself made her feel extremely giddy. Yes, I beat Makoto in parenting as well as raising prodigies. Kushina could not help but cheer. I had to go rub it in her face later. Naruto only raised an eyebrow at Kushina's actions. How could a grown adult act like that? In front of her own, adoptive, son, no less. He waited patiently for the woman to get off her high, deciding against interrupting her joy. Kushina finally calmed down after about 30 seconds of cheering to herself. I guess it would not hurt to teach you the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, considering the size of your reserves. Do note that this is actually an advanced cloning technique that forms actual bodies that are capable of transferring information to the user after dispelling. It is normally used during information gathering for scouting, but I believe that you will be able to utilize it better and optimize its usage, Kushina explained, not knowing that Naruto already knew of the uses of the technique and was utilizing it in his studies. I will help him in his Kekkei genkai training once I help him master all his elements, Kushina told herself, not knowing that Naruto could hear her thoughts. Naruto nodded, deciding to continue with his farce of not knowing anything much despite being incredibly smart. It is a B-rank ninjutsu technique which splits half of the user's chakra into a clone. For that reason, most shinobi are unable to make too many. The only ones who can get past this are jinchuriki and uzumaki, who have naturally large chakra reserves. What you want me to do is utilize the clones in training to gain more experience in a shorter period of time. Kushina nodded approvingly. That's my boy. I will teach you the technique. If you get it before lunch, we will be able to use it during your afternoon training. If you need more time to master it, you can take the rest of the day to get the hang of it. Naruto nodded to convey his understanding. Kushina smiled at the boy, showing Naruto a hand seal that was not among the basic ones that he had seen in the books while explaining. This hand seal is known as the clone seal. It is required in the usage of several different cloning techniques that form physical bodies. Her 2 hands were raised to her chest. 2 fingers from each hand were positioned in a cross, with the right hand being vertical while the left hand was horizontal. Naruto had seen Kakashi use the hand seal to do the jutsu, but he had already learned how to do it without the hand seal. Naruto watched as Kushina shouted out the name of the technique and formed a group of 10 shadow clones in various positions around her. Once the smoke cleared, Naruto followed suit. Naruto did the hand seal and said at a much quieter volume, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." 10 perfect shadow clones puffed into existence around him, shocking Kushina. The previous jutsu had been simple E-ranked ones and were not as surprising to see Naruto manage to do on his first try as a B-ranked ninjutsu technique. She absolutely had to tell Minato all about Naruto's amazing progress. Good. Would you like to try to master it such that you do not need to do the hand seals? Kushina suggested, noting that it was still only 10 in the morning and that Naruto was still very far ahead of her schedule that had already been adjusted to suit his pace of learning. Naruto responded by letting his hands fall to his side and dispelling his clones, only for a fresh batch of clones to appear before the smoke could clear. Kushina was stunned. Mastering an E-ranked jutsu such that you no longer needed handed seals was one thing, but mastering B-ranked ninjutsu to the same extent in a single effortless attempt was another thing altogether. She definitely had to tell Minato and Makoto all about it, for very different reasons, obviously. Alright. Make as many clones as you can. It seems that we are going to begin your elemental manipulation training early, very early, Kushina instructed the 4-year-old prodigy that stood before her, his expression one of complete boredom. Hi, Ka-san, Naruto replied, unwittingly thinking of his real deceased mother. THSTA all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.